Chapter 219. Go to watch net. Feng Na adjusted the position of the microphone and said with a smile. When I was chatting with Junior Yanhua in the audience just now, I said that the new waves of the Yangtze River drive the old waves, and the old waves die on the beach. I hope he won't let me die too ugly. Go to watch net. 7K. Oath M. Now, he really didn't show any mercy and let me die an ugly death. Before she could finish her words, a burst of good-natured laughter came from the audience. Feng Na smiled and said, "Since there is a beautiful jade in front of me, I think I don't need to take out the bricks I prepared. My campaign speech is very simple. Just a few words." After she finished speaking, the students in the audience became curious. Feng Na's unconventional way of doing things made Yanhua curious and vigilant. He muttered, "What tricks is she going to play?" Feng Na stretched out her hand and pointed at Li Yundong, who was sitting at the back. "Everyone knows him, right?" Everyone's eyes suddenly turned to Li Yundong, which caught him off guard. He was stunned. Holy *T, why did this girl mention me? Some nosy students in the small auditorium shouted, "Of course I know him." Some of the teachers in the audience couldn't help frowning when they saw Li Yundong. Yanhua was even more confused. He had no idea what Feng Na's move, which was like a flying immortal from outer space, meant. Feng Na pursed her lips and smiled. Does everyone remember Li Yundong's wonderful performance at the exchange party last semester? Many students in the audience suddenly became excited. Yes, of course. Some freshmen who hadn't seen Li Yundong's performance also asked the people around them curiously. Feng Na smiled and said, "At that time, I begged Li Yundong for a long time before he reluctantly agreed to participate in the performance. I invited him to participate in a very good program at this year's welcome party, but he said that he would only participate in the performance if I won the position of the president of the student union." When Feng Na said this, both the teachers and the students in the small auditorium were shocked. They had never seen such a campaign speech before. Li Yundong was even more shocked. Holy *T, that's too shameless. She actually used me as a shield. The teachers were also stunned. It can't be. Are the students nowadays so utilitarian? Yanhua protested angrily. What kind of speech is this? It's too shameless. She took a deep breath and said, "I'm in my 4th year at Tiannan University. So if you want to see Li Yundong's wonderful performance, please vote for me to be the president of the student council. Please." With that, she bent down, bowed, and left the stage. The audience was in an uproar. The students burst out laughing. They admired Feng Na's earth-shattering approach, but what shocked them the most was that Feng Na had actually put the agreement between her and Li Yundong on the table, and then seduced the students into making their own choices. This was simply too shameless. But I like it. The students laughed heartily. Some of them even waved their arms and shouted, "Boss, we support you. You have to perform well at the party." Some of the students who were eager to see the world in chaos started chanting Li Yundong's name rhythmically. Li Yundong, act. Li Yundong, act. As Feng Na walked down the stage, some students chased after her curiously and asked, "Hey, senior sister, what will Li Yundong be doing? Tell me." Feng Na pursed her lips into a smile and said deliberately, "You want to know? Vote for me." The surrounding students laughed and scolded, "That's too shameless." The teachers looked at Feng Na dumbfoundedly and shook their heads. Yanhua even stomped his feet and scolded, "This is cheating. This is bribery. She must be disqualified." But as soon as his voice came out, it was drowned out by the noise of the small auditorium. No one could hear what he was saying. When Feng Na returned to Li Yundong and Cheng Cheng was already laughing so hard that she couldn't stand up straight. She laughed and said, "Nana, you are too strong and shameless. I admire you so much. You actually thought of such a powerful move. I worship you." After saying that, Cheng made a gesture of prostrating herself on the ground. Go to see net. Hongom Feng Na proudly made a victory sign with her hand and said, "If I go into action, I can do it alone." Li Yundong looked at Feng Na with a straight face and said very solemnly, "Feng Na, I swear to God that you are absolutely the most shameless person in the world, the most shocking and the most shameless person in all of history." Feng Na's face darkened. Feng Na laughed with her hands on her hips and said proudly, "Thank you for the compliment." Li Yundong rolled his eyes at her and said, "Compliment my ass. Your trick won't succeed. See how I'll make your plot fail. With that, he turned around and said loudly, "Students, quiet down." As soon as Li Yundong spoke, the students in the small auditorium quieted down and looked at him in unison, wanting to hear what he had to say. Li Yundong coughed and said, "Senior Sister Feng Na was just joking with you. Don't take it seriously." After he said that, the small auditorium fell silent for a moment, but soon a student shook his arm and shouted, "Boss, we will support you." Then, the students in the small auditorium raised their arms one after another and shouted, "We will support you." Li Yundong laughed and said to Feng Na proudly, "You see, the eyes of the masses are as clear as snow." Feng Na smiled and didn't say anything. After a while, the students began to vote actively. Some of them whispered to each other and looked at Li Yundong one after another. "Go to see." About 10 minutes later, the students finished voting. A teacher and several students from the student union went on the stage and began to announce the votes. The first vote was for Yan Hua. Yan Hua's face suddenly lit up. He turned his face and looked at Feng Na provocatively, then at Li Yundong with hatred. But then, the second vote was for Feng Na. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing and scolding. "Damn, there's really someone who would choose you like this?" Feng Na was still smiling and didn't say anything. Not long after, the third, fourth, fifth and finally, they all voted for Feng Na. Li Yundong was stunned. After the voting was over, he saw 2 rows of shocking words written on the blackboard hanging on the stage of the small auditorium. Yan Hua 1 vote. Feng Na, 499 votes. The others didn't get a single vote, not even their names. Damn it! Li Yundong couldn't help standing up and widening his eyes. What's going on? The students in the small auditorium looked at him in unison and shouted in unison, "Li Yundong, we support you. We support you." Li Yundong was so depressed that he almost vomited blood. F***CK, you call this supporting me? You guys are obviously trying to make a scene, okay? Cheng Cheng and Feng Na laughed. Cheng Cheng smiled at Feng Na and said, "Nana, you did it. You also promoted your new program at the party and locked in Li Yundong, the best foreign aide. You killed 3 birds with 1 stone. It's amazing. I admire you so much. You are a genius." Feng Na proudly raised a victory sign and said, "Of course." Yan Hua, who was at the front, rushed to the teacher angrily, waved his arms and shouted, "This election is unfair. It can't be counted. I protest, I protest." Seeing that Yan Hua was so emotional, the leading teacher comforted him. "Yan Hua, pay attention to your emotions. Don't get agitated. The school committee will discuss this matter." Yan Hua glared at Feng Na angrily. In his heart, he really despised Feng Na's methods. Li Yundong, who was in the middle of his flirtation, saw the teachers of the school committee huddled together and whispered to each other. Suddenly, he smiled and said, "By the way, the school committee has a veto vote. Feng Na, I'm afraid your wishful thinking is not going to work." Feng Na smiled and said, "Really? Do you want to make another bet?" Li Yundong saw that she was full of confidence and couldn't help but wonder, will the school committee really agree? Isn't this ridiculous? This will probably be the most ridiculous election in the history of Tiannan University's student union. If word gets out, it will become a joke. While he was thinking, he suddenly saw Yan Hua walk over and say to Feng Na in a stern voice, "You won't succeed with this kind of dirty trick." Before Feng Na could say anything, Cheng Cheng yelled, "Black cat, white cat, good cat if it can catch mice." Feng Na smiled and said to Yan Hua, "The teachers of the school committee will decide the result of this election." Yan Hua sneered. "Of course. I don't believe that the teachers will be as crazy as the students." As soon as his voice fell, Vice President Feng walked up to the stage, picked up the microphone, and said, "Dear students, after a discussion by the school committee, in order to show respect for the students' right to vote, the school committee has decided to approve Feng Na as the president of the student union. The result of the election will take effect immediately." As soon as he finished speaking, the students below the stage burst into laughter and cheered for him. Vice Principal Feng coughed dryly and said, "However, due to the uniqueness of Feng Na's election method, the school committee believes that this method can only be used once. Otherwise, it will be considered as cheating and will be disqualified from the election." The students didn't care about what he said. They only cared about the fact that this time, Feng Na had been elected president of the student union in a very shameless way, and that Li Yundong had promised to attend the party. At that time, there would be a good show. Some students shouted loudly, "Long live the teachers!" It made the teachers feel very emotional that a student who had been against the teachers all day could shout such a thing. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He said to Feng Na, "You're so lucky. How could you pass like this? Isn't this a little too outrageous? What are the teachers thinking about?" As soon as his voice fell, he saw the students in the auditorium rushing toward him. These students had obviously lost control of their emotions. They shouted, "Li Yundong, what are you going to perform this time? Boss, give me an autograph. Li Yundong, I love you. Let me be your girlfriend." Li Yundong was so scared that he almost wet his pants. He didn't even have time to say goodbye to Feng Na before he ran out of the auditorium like a wolf and a mouse. Yan Hua, who had been standing there in a daze, was shocked and angry. He rushed up to the teachers and shouted angrily, "Are you crazy? How could the dignified school board make such a ridiculous decision?" Vice Principal Feng was also a little angry when he saw Yan Hua's impolite words. He said coldly, "Yan Hua, you have no right to judge the decision made by the school board. Also, I suggest that if you want to run for the position of student union president, you should learn the etiquette of respecting your teachers." With that, he and the other teachers filed out of the small auditorium. The students in the auditorium who had been blocking their way inside the auditorium made way for them and applauded. While applauding the teachers, Cheng Cheng whispered to Feng Na, "Nana, you didn't really have a card up your sleeve, did you?" Feng Na smiled proudly. "What do you think?" Cheng Cheng said thoughtfully, "Li Yundong's popularity at Tiannan University has reached an incredible level. If you use his popularity to your advantage, you might be able to achieve this result. But aren't you afraid of the school board's veto?" Feng Na blinked at Cheng Cheng. "Have you forgotten what we saw at the school board last time?" "Ah, you mean..." Cheng Cheng suddenly remembered that the last time she and Feng Na stood in front of the school board's office and saw an official walk out of it, all the heads of the school had behaved respectfully toward him. Since then, not a single teacher in the school had dared to point fingers at Li Yundong. Cheng Cheng's eyes widened. Cheng Cheng pointed at Feng Na and said with a smile, "You sly guy. So you knew that the school leaders didn't dare to offend Li Yundong's background." The two girls whispered to each other and laughed secretly. Yan Hua was so angry that he almost went crazy. He rushed up to Feng Na again and shouted angrily, "I don't accept this. If you have the ability, then come and compete with me for the election. I won't lose to you." Feng Na looked at him sympathetically and sighed. She said, "You didn't lose to me, you lost to Li Yundong." Yan Hua couldn't swallow his anger. He choked and said, "I lost to him? He didn't participate in the speech?" Feng Na smiled and said, "How could I have defeated you without him? I'm just borrowing his power. If he runs for the president of the student union himself, both you and I will have to stand aside. Do you understand? Yan Hua, you have to remember, as long as you are at Tiannan University, don't even think about competing with this boy, because the height he has reached is beyond your reach. /om/ Chapter 220. Go to watch net. After Li Yundong rushed out of the small auditorium, he ran dozens of meters away before he stopped in shock. He put his hands on his hips, shook his head, and sighed to himself. Li Yundong, you are a cultivator, but you were so scared that you peed your pants. You are really useless. Li Yundong looked back at the small auditorium and said with a wry smile, "This place is definitely my bad luck. It was like this last time, and it will be the same this time." Li Yundong shook his head and laughed for a while, then walked to the school library, ready to return the books and borrow some new ones. Go to watch net. When he arrived at the library, the old man in charge of the library saw Li Yundong and immediately smiled. "Have you finished reading the books you borrowed yesterday?" Li Yundong smiled, took out 2 books, and handed them over. Then, he chose 2 more books and said with a smile, "Yes, sorry to trouble you again." The old man smiled and said, "Don't mention it. This is our job." As he spoke, he walked to the library area and helped Li Yundong choose the 2 books he wanted. He handed them over with a smile, but his eyes fell on the fan of 7 treasures tightly wrapped in cloth behind Li Yundong. He suddenly asked, "Is it convenient for you to carry such a big thing on your back?" Li Yundong took the book and said casually with a smile, "At first, it was very inconvenient, but now I'm a little used to it." The old man nodded slowly and asked tentatively, "If I ask you what's inside, you probably won't tell me either." Li Yundong chuckled and didn't answer. He just waved his hand politely to the old man and said, "Goodbye, teacher. I'll come back next time." The old man also smiled and didn't say anything more. Li Yundong walked slowly home. When he got home, it was already past 5 o'clock in the afternoon. As soon as he opened the door, he saw that the cooked food was already on the table. It was steaming and fragrant. Li Yundong knew that it must have been Zi Yuan's cooking. He smiled and shouted, "Zi Yuan? Did you cook it?" He shouted and walked to the kitchen, but he didn't see Zi Yuan. Although the kitchen had been cooked, it was neatly cleaned and shiny. Li Yundong sat at the table and ate his dinner slowly. After cleaning the dishes and chopsticks in the kitchen, he returned to the living room and found that Zi Yuan was still making a cup of water on the coffee table in the living room. He tested the temperature. Although it had been a while, the water was still warm. Li Yundong couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Except for her cold temperament and being a little too otherworldly, she is simply the most perfect woman in the world in other aspects. She is so beautiful, does housework so well, and is so meticulous. Whoever marries her is really blessed by several lifetimes. Li Yundong wasn't thirsty at first, but when he saw the transparent color of the glass of water with a faint green color, he couldn't help but taste it curiously. After tasting it, he immediately found that the water was the same as the one he had drunk last time. It had a clear and bright feeling, as if the qi and blood in his body would be much more smooth and vigorous as soon as he touched it. Watch net. Color *** literature under learning % super #speed. Update. There's a mystery. Li Yundong looked at the glass of water curiously. The last time he had eaten the ginseng fruit, he hadn't tasted it carefully. This time, he took a sip and tasted it carefully. As soon as he tasted it, he suddenly felt a fragrance lingering in his mouth. The lingering fragrance filled his mouth, and even his teeth had a refreshing feeling. Li Yundong became more and more curious. He couldn't help but drink up the glass of water, then sat cross-legged in the living room and began to meditate and practice qi. Li Yundong found that after drinking this glass of water, his meditation and qi cultivation were twice the result with half the effort, and the speed at which the Niden was growing had even doubled. In the past, it was only half the size of a pinky, but now it was the size of a pinky. Through introspection, Li Yundong could clearly feel that this Niden was constantly growing at an astonishing speed. By the time Li Yundong woke up from his meditation, it was already around 12 o'clock in the middle of the night. It was dark all around. Except for the door, all the windows and doors were open, and the sound of the wind echoed in the room. A slim figure stood quietly on the balcony, like a fairy who had descended from heaven. Her figure was ethereal, and her long sleeves were fluttering. It was Zi Yuan. Li Yundong found Zi Yuan standing silently on the balcony. He said in surprise, "You're here? What's the matter?" While Li Yundong was cultivating, Zi Yuan had been staring at him, as if she was guarding him or observing his progress. When she saw that Li Yundong had woken up, she moved her eyes away and looked at the empty cup on the tea table beside her. She nodded secretly and asked, "How do you feel about the shentong cultivation?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, "Not bad. I feel that my Niden is twice as strong as before. I don't know if the progress is fast." "Is it fast?" A clear voice sounded from the side. Ruan Hongling's figure flashed and appeared next to Zi Yuan in the blink of an eye. She put her hands on her hips and said, "Do you know that ordinary cultivators have to cultivate for at least 5 years to double the Niden of the Xueqi phase? You did it in just a few days. Do you know why?" Li Yundong was stunned. He was also a smart person and quickly reacted. He looked at the cup on the tea table beside him and said, "Could it be?" Ruan Hongling snorted and said, "You finally found out. Don't tell me you didn't notice it before. Do you know what you are drinking? Don't really think that you are a rare genius in 1,000 years. You can make such rapid progress in cultivation. Let me tell you, even a rare genius in 10,000 years can't double his shentong in a few days." Zi Yuan, who was standing to one side, shouted in a low voice, "Hongling!" Ruan Hongling stomped her feet and said indignantly, "Sister Zi Yuan, it's true. If I didn't say it, some people would have thought that it was his own ability. Your 9-turn-do pill is so precious, but you gave it to this guy. I only tasted one, but he took 2 at once. You are so unfair." Li Yundong was stunned. 9-turn-do pill? What is this? Ruan Hongling snorted coldly and said, "This is the supreme elixir of our sect. Although our Zhengyi school is not as famous as the Gazao sect for alchemy as the external alchemy sect, the external alchemy we refine also has a strange skill of seizing the good fortune of heaven and earth." As she said this, Ruan Hongling pointed to the cup on the tea table and said loudly, "The tea you just swallowed in one breath is the 9-turn-do pill. Although this elixir is not as good as the Renyuan Jindan of the Gazao sect, which can increase one's cultivation strength by 60 years, it can at least increase one's cultivation strength by 5 years. Not to mention anything else, such an elixir alone can be sold for tens of millions in the cultivation market. Do you think it is an ordinary pill of tonifying qi or lu wei di huang?" Although Li Yundong didn't know why the 9-turn-do pill was so precious, nor did he know how it was made, he was shocked when he heard that it could be sold for 10 million yuan. Go to see. Net. Super_speed. More. New. Li Yundong's eyes widened. He pointed to the cup and then to himself. "Do you mean that I just drank 10 million yuan in one breath?" Ruan Hongling looked at him with jealousy and hatred. "It's 20 million yuan. You also swallowed a cup yesterday. This kind of elixir is extremely delicious, and it's full of fragrance. It's a pity that it was wasted by you." Zi Yuan couldn't bear to listen anymore. She shouted in a low voice, "Hongling, shut up!" Ruan Hongling stamped her feet angrily. "Isn't that the case?" Zi Yuan glared at her. "Don't you listen to me?" Ruan Hongling snorted and turned her head away. Zi Yuan said softly to Li Yundong, "Your divine retribution is imminent. Cultivation is the most important thing. Moreover, these are just worldly possessions. Leaving them with me is like throwing a bright pearl into the dark. They won't be of much benefit. Such things should be left to people who need them more." Li Yundong sighed and said with emotion, "Anyway, I don't need to worry about it now. I owe you more than a little. I don't think I'll be able to pay it off in a short time." Zi Yuan smiled slightly. "Did I say that I wanted you to pay it off?" Li Yundong was stunned, and his expression became a little strange. In his opinion, Zi Yuan had been helping him like this, but she had never asked for anything in return. This kind of behavior was simply incredible. Could it be that this fairy sister has fallen in love with me? A thought came to Li Yundong's mind for no reason, but he quickly denied it. Impossible. Even if she likes me, I don't like her. I like my girl. Li Yundong coughed dryly and said to Zi Yuan, "By the way, I haven't asked you yet. Why did you two come so late at night?" Zi Yuan said, "The divine retribution is getting closer and closer. I came to see how far you have progressed in your shentong cultivation. By the way, do you have anything you want to learn?" Li Yundong asked curiously, "You want to teach me magic cultivation? What do you know?" Before Zi Yuan could speak, Ruan Hongling rushed to say, "What are you talking about? Do you know how powerful Sister Zi Yuan is? There is no magic of the 5 elements that she doesn't know." Li Yundong didn't bother to bicker with this girl. He looked at Zi Yuan and asked, "Do you know Heavenly Thunder?" Zi Yuan was shocked. "You want to learn Heavenly Thunder?" Li Yundong nodded and said, "Of course. I want to learn Heavenly Thunder." Zi Yuan frowned secretly and said, "You should know that the magic of the world can't be separated from the 5 elements of gold, wood, water, fire, and earth. Although there are thousands of Taoist magic, most of them are the same. Only Heavenly Thunder magic is above the 5 elements. Heavenly Thunder is the power of heaven. The power of heaven is unpredictable, and Heavenly Thunder is difficult to cultivate. Compared with Heavenly Thunder, the 5 elements are the easiest to learn. If you learn it to a high level, it will not be inferior to the power of Heavenly Thunder at all. Why do you want to give up the easy and seek the difficult? Why do you want to learn such a dangerous and difficult magic?" Li Yundong suddenly smiled. "You always tell me that the divine retribution is coming. But I don't even know what Heavenly Thunder is. How can I go through the divine retribution? As the saying goes, know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. Only by understanding Heavenly Thunder can I better deal with it. What's more?" As Li Yunyong spoke, his face suddenly became very unruly. He sneered and said, "I remember you once said that the people of our Taoist sect pay attention to going against heaven. Man can conquer heaven. My fate is up to me, not to heaven." Li Yundong quickly walked past Zi Yuan and the others. He walked to the balcony, pointed to the starry sky outside, and said loudly, "But in fact, every one of you is afraid of heavenly thunder and divine retribution. Because of this, you don't dare to ask too much about the affairs of the world. For fear that divine retribution will come to you, you are willing to be a turtle hiding its head and showing its tail. Is this kind of evasion called 'my fate is in my own hands'?" Li Yundong sneered and said, "Because you are afraid of heavenly thunder, you don't dare to cultivate heavenly thunder magic. Because you are afraid of divine retribution, you don't dare to ask about the affairs of the world. What kind of cultivation is this? What kind of man can conquer heaven? It's said that heavenly thunder is difficult to cultivate, but I don't believe it. I just want to prove that not only can I survive divine retribution, but I can also control heavenly thunder. Humph, the power of heaven is unpredictable. I just want to hold this power in my hands. Knowing that the path of cultivation is dangerous, so taking a detour is not cultivation. Only when you know that you can't do it, that's cultivation. I want to cultivate, and I must become a first-class cultivator in the world. I want to travel the ninth heaven, and the power of heaven can't stop me. I want to travel the ninth earth, and the chasm can't restrain me. I want there to be no more disasters in the world that can threaten me, and nothing can threaten my loved ones." Li Yundong stood on the balcony, the corners of his clothes fluttering in the wind, and his black hair was flying. His words were resolute and powerful, and his momentum shook Zi Yuan and Ruan Hongling, who were from famous sections. Ruan Hongling stared at Li Yundong with her eyes wide open. If Li Yundong had said such words in the past, she would have retorted, but she had witnessed Li Yundong recklessly attracting heavenly thunder to kill young Master He. Last time, it could be said that Li Yundong didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth and did such a thing in a rush of blood. But now he was a cultivator through and through. He could still say such words in the face of divine retribution, which could only show that this boy had amazing courage and extraordinary courage that ordinary people didn't have. Where did the charm of a man come from? The charm of a man came from many places, but the most attractive thing to women was the fearlessness of a man who dared to challenge heaven and earth. Ruan Hongling looked at Li Yundong in a daze. She suddenly felt that there was a dazzling light on this boy's body, which made her unable to look directly at him. Zi Yuan was also shocked by Li Yundong's words. Nowadays, the cultivation world could be said to be a pool of stagnant water. All the sects and schools treasured their own treasures and were extremely selfish. They all thought that they would sweep the snow in front of their own door and not care about the frost on the roof of others. Every day, they haggled over every little thing and fought for power and profit. How could anyone make such a loud and soul-stirring cry in this dark, murky world? Zi Yuan took a deep breath. After all, she had a profound cultivation base, so she quickly recovered from the shock. She said, "Well, I'll teach you how to fly by qi first." Li Yundong asked in confusion, "Why do I have to learn how to fly by qi before practicing the magic of heavenly thunder? Do the two have anything to do with each other?" Zi Yuan smiled slightly. "If you don't learn how to fly, how can you understand one of the three great horrors of cultivation? The great horror between heaven and earth? If you don't understand the great horror between heaven and earth, how can you understand heavenly thunder, learn it, and master it? /om/ Chapter 221. Go to watch net. After Zi Yuan finished speaking, Li Yundong immediately nodded and said, "Well, how can I learn to fly by qi?" Zi Yuan was not in a hurry to speak. She turned her head and whispered to Ruan Hongling, "You go back first. I'll teach him how to fly by qi." Ruan Hongling nodded. Surprisingly, she was not in a bad mood. Before she left, she just glanced at Li Yundong with a complicated look in her eyes and then flew back to her residence. Go to watch net. 7K. Oath am. After Ruan Hongling left, Zi Yuan said to Li Yundong, "In fact, it is not difficult to fly by qi, but the difficulty lies in the fact that people who want to fly by qi must have a huge amount of zhenqi. Ordinary people may not be able to cultivate their zhenqi to the point where they can grasp their own bodies even after cultivating for a lifetime. However, you obtain the Renyuan Jindan by chance. You have a huge amount of Jindan's primordial qi, and you are in the Zhuji phase, so the zhenqi in your body is especially pure and vigorous. You don't have to worry about this." Li Yundong asked, "What exactly should I do?" Zi Yuan said, "Sit down on the futon first. I'll tell you later." Li Yundong sat down cross-legged and asked, "Then what?" Zi Yuan said, "Run your qi as usual, but be careful not to meditate. You have to maintain your divine sense and consciously control the zhenqi in your body to release it to your lower body." Li Yundong was already extremely familiar with the control of qi. He immediately followed Zi Yuan's instructions, closed his eyes, and mobilized the zhenqi in his body continuously, releasing it to his lower body. As soon as Li Yundong released his zhenqi, he felt as if there were countless tentacles under his body. It was as if he had a few more legs, and he could feel things outside his skin. After a while, after Li Yundong's huge zhenqi was released to a certain extent, his body slowly rose by half an inch. At first glance, it seemed that he was floating in the air. After a while, Li Yundong faintly felt that the qi under his cross-legged body seemed to have turned into a thick leg, lifting his body abruptly. Zi Yuan, who was standing to one side, suddenly said, "Now, open your eyes." Li Yundong opened his eyes and found himself floating in the air with his but half a foot off the ground. Li Yunyang was shocked. The qi in his body immediately became chaotic. As soon as the qi was chaotic, the turbid qi was born. His body fell from a height of half a foot and fell onto the rush cushion. Although Li Yundong's body had been reconstructed by the Jindan, he was not an invincible Vajra body. He couldn't bear falling down like this, especially when a man was sitting cross-legged. If he fell down on his buttocks, although he had his fat buttocks as a buffer, his two balls would also be affected. F***ck. Li Yundong felt as if someone had punched his lower body hard. The pain made him see stars and grimace. He looked at Zi Yuan, gritted his teeth and said, "Why did you ask me to open my eyes? I almost fell to my death." Zi Yuan looked at him in confusion. "Is it very painful?" Li Yundong looked at Zi Yuan with a face full of hidden bitterness and said indignantly, "You women don't know what it feels like to have a pain in the ass." Zi Yuan looked at Li Yundong and blinked her eyes. "Then do you know what it feels like for a woman to have her period every month?" Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "I mean, this kind of thing shouldn't have come from a fairy like you, right? What's more, shouldn't you be a cultivator who was in the Xueqi phase before the arrival of Tiangue? How could you know how menstruation feels?" Zi Yuan said lightly, "My master said that cultivators have to taste all kinds of human emotions, so I simulated that scene and tried that feeling." Li Yundong looked at Zi Yuan with his mouth agape and tongue tied. In his mind, the scene of Zi Yuan, a fairy-like woman, changing a sanitary pad in the bathroom appeared. That scene was really disgusting, too disgusting. Li Yundong gave her a thumbs up and said to Zi Yuan, "Very good, you're awesome, you're invincible. I'm convinced. Let's not talk about this. What should I do next?" At the beginning, Zi Yuan felt that it was a little inappropriate to say this, but words that had been said were like water that had been poured out. How could she take them back? Although her face was slightly hot because of Li Yundong's words, fortunately, she had a strong ability to control it. She just said lightly, "You have to slowly learn to open your eyes and control your breath. Only when one's aura was stable could one's true essence be stable. Once one's true essence was stable, one would be able to grasp balance in midair and then use the power of true essence to catch oneself." Watch net. 7K. O-// Li Yunyang nodded. First, he closed his eyes and began to control his qi. Then, he released his zhenqi and slowly lifted himself up. After reaching a certain level, she said, "Now, open your eyes." This time, Li Yundong opened his eyes and was mentally prepared. At first, his body only swayed slightly, but he soon stabilized. Zi Yuan nodded and then said, "Open your eyes and move your qi a little higher." Watch net. Li Yundong tried to control the zhenqi to raise himself a little higher. Before long, he was already more than a meter above the ground. At this time, Zi Yuan said, "Slowly try to put your feet down." Li Yundong did as he was told and slowly put his feet down. As soon as he put his feet down, he immediately felt his body suddenly sink and he fell to the ground with a thud. Li Yundong asked in confusion, "Why? Why do I feel like my body has become much heavier as soon as I put my feet down?" Zi Yuan explained, "Because when people sit cross-legged, the qi in the human body is the smoothest and smoothest. From the lower dantian of the lower abdomen to the yongquan acupoint of the feet, although the length of the qi does not change, the qi has to go from top to bottom and then from bottom to top. In the past, the qi had to go nearly a meter high, but after sitting cross-legged, It only needs to go about the height of a palm. Naturally, the qi will be smoother. So when you put your legs down, the qi in your body suddenly becomes less smooth, so you feel that your body is heavy. Li Yundong suddenly understood. Then what should I do? Zi Yuan said, it's easy. When you put your legs down, speed up the flow of qi. Li Yundong nodded to show that he understood. He sat down cross-legged again and slowly used qi to make himself float. When he was more than a meter above the ground, he opened his eyes and slowly put down his legs. This time, with experience, his body only suddenly sank an inch, and then he stabilized his body. Zi Yuan nodded and said, well, that's it. When you get used to it, you can fly directly. You don't need to sit cross-legged to fly. As she spoke, she walked to the balcony, and then her body suddenly floated out of the balcony. Her body was suspended in the air. Zi Yuan smiled at Li Yundong and said, now, come out with me and experience the great horror of heaven and earth. Li Yundong was a little stunned. Now, immediately? I just learned how to float. You want me to fly? Isn't it a little too fast? Zi Yuan asked with a smile, what's wrong? You were so brave just now, and now you want to retreat? Li Yundong raised his eyebrows and said, are you kidding? Come on. After that, he controlled the zhenqi in his body to move fiercely. His body sped up in an instant, and he rushed out of the living room and flew out of the balcony. Li Yundong flew into the air. This was the first time he had flown in the air. He couldn't help looking down and suddenly saw that the ground under his feet seemed to have turned into a huge mouth in an instant. It was opening its bloody mouth at him, waiting for him to fall down and swallow him in an instant. This terrible sense of vertigo at such a high altitude made Li Yundong's heart suddenly jump. His qi suddenly sank, and his whole body also sank. This sinking didn't matter, but Li Yundong immediately felt a terrible sense of weightlessness, which made his heart beat wildly and his qi and blood surge. His body tilted and he quickly fell to the ground. Li Yundong cursed in his heart, but as soon as this thought flashed through his mind, his wrist was grabbed with a snap. It was Zi Yuan who stretched out her white and soft hand and gently grabbed his body. Zi Yuan said with a smile, there is great horror in the world. Only by defeating this kind of horror can you keep your qi stable and smooth in any state. Only when your qi is 100% stable can you attract heavenly thunder. In this way, when heavenly thunder falls, it can hit your target more accurately. Although Zi Yuan didn't directly laugh at Li Yundong, Li Yundong felt that her smile seemed to be mocking him for talking big just now. He was a proud person, so he immediately thought to himself, if she can do it, why can't I? After thinking about it, Li Yundong took a deep breath and guarded his soul tightly. His mind was blank. After he stabilized his body, he said to Zi Yuan, okay, let go. Zi Yuan let go of his hand, and sure enough, she saw Li Yundong floating steadily in the air. Fortunately, the colors of the clothes they were wearing were not conspicuous, and it was late at night. Otherwise, if someone saw them, it would be the headline of the next day's news. Zi Yuan nodded to Li Yundong and said, fly up with me and see how high you can fly. After Li Yundong guarded the spiritual platform tightly, the aura all over his body was vigorous and condensed, and it did not dissipate. This also made his state of mind calm and steady, no longer as impatient as before when he encountered something unexpected. He nodded and said, okay. After that, he controlled his body to fly up. Li Yundong controlled his zhenqi to fly up continuously. He felt as if there was an invisible hand wrapping around him and constantly pulling him up. Gradually, his flying speed became faster and faster, and he flew higher and higher. After a while, the building where he had lived before was already dozens of meters above his feet. Zi Yuan followed closely beside him and said loudly, you have to remember, don't fly on a thunderstorm, let alone use a magical item to fly. Otherwise, it will be easy to attract heavenly thunder. Now you can go back. If you fly any higher, you will attract heavenly thunder. Li Yundong didn't answer her. He seemed to be holding back his breath to prove something in his heart. He still controlled his body to fly quickly into the sky. Zi Yuan was stunned. Seeing that Li Yundong was still flying up, she couldn't help but shout, stop flying. It's dangerous to fly any higher. Li Yundong didn't seem to have heard her. He wanted to challenge his limits, and he also wanted to experience the great horror between heaven and earth. He rushed up into the sky with all his might, as if he wanted to poke a hole in the sky. Although there was a bright moon that night, There were many dark clouds in the sky, and they were low and thick. After Li Yundong passed through the clouds, he suddenly found that there was an open space in front of him. The moon, which was like a silver plate, was hanging high in the vast sky, enchanting and unusually bright. Li Yundong only felt that the sky was so vast that he was as small as a speck of dust in it, with nothing to rely on. The sky is so vast, and people are so small. Li Yundong sighed in his heart. But if this is the great horror between heaven and earth, it's too much of an exaggeration. As soon as this thought flashed through his mind, he suddenly felt an extremely terrible force gathering in the air. There seemed to be a black hole around him, constantly rotating and pulling the dark clouds below. The dark clouds were constantly pulled and gathered, and soon turned into a ferocious face with twisted eyebrows and wide eyes. The bright moon that had been sleeping just now happened to be in the position of the vertical pupil between the eyebrows in this terrifying face. It was cold and gloomy, like the cold and emotionless eyes of a god. When Li Yundong was stared at by this eye, he felt his whole body go numb, and a creepy feeling spread all over his body in an instant. Then, there was a loud explosion in the sky. Thunder and lightning were rolling in the ferocious face of the dark clouds. Li Yundong was in the middle of the coming terrible heavenly tribulation. His hair stood on end, and the blood in his body seemed to freeze in an instant. The great horror between heaven and earth is like this. Li Yundong's eyes widened. He could feel his body trembling uncontrollably. Just as the heavenly lightning was about to strike, a figure suddenly flashed to his side and grabbed him. Hurry up and leave. I recommend a buyout fantasy book. Immortal Golden Body is also a cultivation theme. If you are interested, you can read it. In addition, Fox's Nest 1, 2, and 3 are full. Please join the new 4th group. 45316576/OM/ Chapter 222. Go to watch net. Zi Yuan grabbed him and rushed toward the ground like a bolt of lightning. Watch net. 7K. OM. It was so fast that Li Yundong could hear the sound of the wind whistling in his ears. The wind was so strong that it made his cheeks ache. Zi Yuan quickly pulled Li Yundong back to the balcony of his residence. As soon as their feet touched the ground, Zi Yuan couldn't help saying in a stern voice, "Are you crazy? Fly that high. Didn't they say that flying too high would attract the heavenly tribulation?" Li Yundong was still in a daze, his eyes fixed on the sky. Seeing his expression, Zi Yuan was shocked. Did I speak too harshly just now? If it left a shadow and inner demon in his heart, it would be bad. It would cause his progress to stagnate. Thinking of this, the expression on Zi Yuan's face eased a lot. She wanted to say something to comfort him, but he suddenly jumped up and laughed. Zi Yuan was puzzled. What are you laughing at? Li Yundong smiled and said, I can fly. Zi Yuan's eyes widened. You can fly? Didn't you see the impending heavenly tribulation? Why are you so happy about this? Li Yundong looked at her with a smile and said, I saw it. But what of it? I'm still alive, aren't I? Zi Yuan was stunned and said, Don't you feel afraid of the great horror between heaven and earth? The smile on Li Yundong's face faded a little, and he said lightly, I was really scared just now, but now that I think about it, I feel that I want to learn the heavenly thunder even more, because if I can master such a powerful power, it will be a great pleasure to conquer. Zi Yuan looked him up and down in shock. She shook her head secretly and said, This person is definitely a freak in the cultivation world. This is the first time I've seen a cultivator who is not afraid of the divine tribulation. I really don't know if he's faking it or if he's stupid. Li Yundong saw her expression and asked with a smile, You don't believe me? Zi Yuan shook her head and said, It's not that I don't believe it, I just find it unbelievable. Watch net. Are your guts made of steel? Li Yundong smiled and said, I just think that we have to look at the good side of things. The good thing just now is that I know what the great horror of heaven and earth is, and I have also learned to fly. Most importantly, I am still alive. As long as people are still alive, there are infinite possibilities, right? Zi Yuan found that although the boy in front of her had just entered the path of cultivation, sometimes the words he said could also make people's eyes light up and think deeply. She smiled and said, You have a first-rate temperament. However, don't be so reckless next time. Don't touch the great terror between heaven and earth so easily. Also, since you've learned how to fly, Let's call it a day. I'll head back first. As he spoke, his figure flashed and he was about to fly back to Wan Hongling's home. As Li Yundong watched her fly over, he suddenly had an idea and asked, "Hey." Zi Yuan stopped in mid-air and turned to look at him. He asked with a smile, "How does it feel to put on a sanitary pad when you have that?" Zi Yuan's body shook and she almost fell from the air. She glared at Li Yundong with shame and anger. She wanted to say, "What does it feel like for you men to have a pain in the ass?" But when the words were on the tip of her tongue, she couldn't say them out loud. Li Yundong's prank had succeeded, so he stopped bickering with her and went into the room with a laugh. Zi Yuan was left alone in the air, staring at Li Yundong's departing figure with a flushed face. Fortunately, it was night time. Otherwise, if this bastard saw her reaction, it would be so embarrassing. Zi Yuan took a deep breath and calmed down before returning home. As soon as she entered the balcony, Wan Hongling immediately came up and asked, "Sister Zi Yuan, what happened just now? Why do I feel like there was a divine punishment? What a terrible divine power." Zi Yuan said with some resentment, "Li Yundong is a newborn calf who is not afraid of tigers. He flew very high in one breath and almost caused a divine punishment." Wan Hongling's eyes suddenly widened. So he was scared? Zi Yuan couldn't help but say with a strange expression, "It doesn't seem like it. On the contrary, his fighting spirit has increased." Wan Hongling was stunned on the spot and could not come to her senses for a long time. After a long time, she sighed faintly and said, "Sister Zi Yuan, do you think he can survive the heavenly tribulation?" Zi Yuan's expression suddenly became very serious. She thought about it seriously and said, "I don't know. Based on the current situation, it's unlikely." Wan Hongling sighed and said, "If he can survive the heavenly tribulation, it is very likely that he will become a great cultivator with great magical power in the future." Zi Yuan suddenly smiled and shook her head. Watch net. Color *** literature under learning % super #speed. Update. Wan Hongling asked, "You don't believe me?" Zi Yuan still shook her head and said, "No, it's not very likely, but definitely. Moreover, as long as he can survive the heavenly tribulation, he will grow into a powerhouse that only appears once in 100 years in the cultivation world. He might even be able to establish his own sect." Wan Hongling was extremely shocked. She felt that she had already thought highly of Li Yundong, but she hadn't expected that Zi Yuan would think even higher of him. Establish a sect? Wouldn't that be a great master like Zhang Sanfeng and Wang Yongming? Wan Hongling said in shock. Can he compare with such a person who only appears once in 500 years? Zi Yuan looked at the place where Li Yundong lived, and her eyes suddenly became very distant. She said lightly, "This guy, Humph, as long as he survives the heavenly tribulation, then everything is possible." It was the first time that Li Yundong had learned to fly. He practiced repeatedly for a long time all night. It was not until dawn that he felt a little tired. He sat cross-legged in the living room and rested for a while. Then, he carried the fan of 7 treasures and went to school. As soon as he entered the school, a curious student came up to Li Yundong and asked, "Boss, what's going on at the welcoming party? What are you going to do?" At first, Li Yundong could still smile and say, "You'll know when the time comes." But later, there was an endless stream of people asking questions. Li Yundong couldn't stand it anymore and had to flee. As soon as he fled into the teaching building, he saw Feng Na and a few people discussing something in the stairwell. As soon as Li Yundong saw her, he became angry. He said, "Feng Na." Hearing the voice, Feng Na turned her head and laughed. "Yo, the big star is here." Li Yundong said angrily, "You made it impossible for me to stay in this school." Feng Na covered her mouth and laughed. "There's a price to pay for being a star. The welcoming party will start in 2 days. It'll be fine then. Hey, by the way, remember to come to the rehearsal this afternoon." Li Yundong rolled his eyes at her and said grumpily, "I'm not going." With that, he walked away. Feng Na chased after him and said, "Hey, you have to come. You have lines. Don't fall apart during the performance." Li Yundong chuckled. "You were the one who asked me to act, but I can't guarantee the effect." As he said this, he finally found a little pleasure of revenge. He smiled at Feng Na and said, "I'm very vengeful." Feng Na watched Li Yundong walk away, dumbfounded. She stomped her feet angrily. That bastard! Her classmates were dumbfounded. They didn't have much contact with Li Yundong, and the only news they knew was hearsay or what they saw on the forum. But today, they found that this legendary figure, who seemed so high and mighty and unreachable, was actually such a scoundrel. Feng Na, one of her classmates, said to Feng Na, "It seems that asking him to do the performance might not be a good thing." Before Li Yundong entered the classroom, he could hear the students in the classroom discussing what had happened in the small auditorium the day before. Some of the students who had gone to the voting were describing the scene vividly, while others who had not gone were beating their chests and stamping their feet in regret. Li Yundong walked to the door and hesitated. He didn't know whether he should go in or not. If he did, he was afraid that he would be surrounded by a crowd of people. That would not feel good. While he was hesitating, he suddenly saw Ding Nan walking toward the classroom with a small bag in her hand. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He immediately went up to her. "Ding Nan, it's time to tell me where Xueqi is today, right?" Li Yundong asked. Ding Nan couldn't help but look at Li Yundong's eyes, trying to find a trace of hypocrisy in them. But after a long time, she couldn't find anything. She had to give up. But she was also a little unwilling to give up. She snorted coldly and asked, "Everyone is avoiding her now. Are you sure you really want to go?" Li Yundong retorted, "If you flatter her when you gain power, and throw her to the ground when you lose power, what's the difference between you and a despicable person?" Ding Nan couldn't help but feel angry. She thought that Li Yundong was calling her a despicable person. It's human nature to seek benefits and avoid harm. Do you understand? I saw that you were different from the others. That's why I tried to persuade you. How could you say that? Don't be so childish. Li Yundong said in a low voice, "If this is maturity, then I'd rather be childish for the rest of my life. Since she is my friend, then I should help her when she is in the most difficult situation. Otherwise, what kind of friend would I be?" Ding Nan felt very uncomfortable. On the one hand, she still stubbornly believed that Li Yundong was pretending to be more powerful than he was. But on the other hand, she subconsciously hoped that she could be like Xueqi and receive such care and concern from Li Yundong. There are many people in this world who add flowers to embroidery, but there are few who offer help in times of need. Is he such a person? Ding Nan stared at Li Yundong blankly. She felt as if her heart was being twisted by a knife. No, he must be trying to save face. When he sees Xueqi, he won't say that. Seeing that Ding Nan was silent, Li Yundong said in a low voice, "Ding Nan, even if your relationship with her is not good now, you should still go and see her for the sake of your good relationship in the past." Ding Nan jumped up as if her tail had been stepped on. "My relationship with her has never been good. She's just using me." Li Yundong immediately said, "Aren't you also using her?" Ding Nan felt as if someone had stabbed her in the heart. She lost her composure and shouted, "The First People's Hospital of the city. If you want to go, go by yourself. I hate her, I hate her." Li Yundong had wanted to persuade Ding Nan, but when he heard that Xueqi was in the hospital, he couldn't stay any longer. He turned around and ran out of the school. Ding Nan stood where she was. She couldn't stop the tears from flowing down her cheeks. She murmured, "Why can't I let you look at me again? Now that you know her whereabouts, you're not even willing to talk to me? /om/" Chapter 223. Go to Watch Network. After Li Yundong arrived at the First People's Hospital of the city, he asked the inpatient department about Xueqi's room. Go to net. Super_speed. More. New. Hello, the patient you want to visit is in room 502 of the general care ward of the first building of the inpatient department. Now is the family visit time. You can go to visit. The nurse with a sweet voice said something that surprised Li Yundong. Why is Xueqi in the general care ward? A bad thought suddenly flashed through Li Yundong's mind. He quickly rushed to Xueqi's ward. Along the way, the strong smell of medicine in the inpatient department made Li Yundong feel that it was like an open concentration camp. Compared with the inhumane concentration camp during World War II, the only difference between this place and the inhumane concentration camp was that it was operated legally. The people inside wanted to get out, but they couldn't get out for a while. The people outside didn't want to come in, but they would eventually come here for various reasons. It was as if this was the home of people. When he arrived at the corridor on the 5th floor of the first building of the inpatient department, There were many old people walking with crutches and family members helping to hold the infusion bottles. Li Yundong felt like he was in a strange world. He couldn't imagine why a woman like Xueqi would be in such a place. Li Yundong followed the room number all the way. When he found room 502, he found that although there were 4 beds in room 502, the 4 beds were empty. There was only a woman with long hair sitting in a wheelchair with her back to him. Li Yundong walked into the ward and asked, "Hello, may I ask?" As soon as his voice sounded, the woman in the wheelchair trembled all over. Then she couldn't help but tighten her grip on the armrest, and her body trembled slightly. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He quickly walked up to the woman and saw that there was a beautiful woman sitting in the wheelchair, but her skin was pale and her eyes were lifeless. It was Xueqi. This shock was no small matter. Li Yundong couldn't believe his eyes. Where was the proud, confident, and beautiful Xueqi who was usually proud and confident? How did Xueqi, who used to be a woman who was not inferior to men, become like this? He couldn't help but squat down and grab Xueqi's hand with both hands, but she shrank back as if she had been electrocuted. He felt as if someone had hit him in the head with a stick. His head was buzzing, and his heart was anxious and irritated. How did you become like this? Xueqi's dark eyes were fixed on Li Yundong. Her inner world was like a stormy sea. He's here, he's finally here. When everyone left me and didn't dare to come into contact with me, he finally came. Xueqi's lips moved slightly, and her retracted hand moved slightly, as if she wanted to reach out again and touch his warm fingertips. But just as she was about to reach out, there seemed to be a demonic voice shouting in her mind, "Wake up! Look at you now! You are a useless person. You have nothing left. Other than your beautiful face, what else do you have that is worthy of his love? You're just a burden now. You'll only become his burden." As soon as this thought flashed through her mind, her slightly straightened fingers curled up again. Watch net. Her heart was tumbling, but the expression on her face did not change at all. It only became more and more indifferent. This kind of expression made Li Yundong more and more shocked. He was more and more sure that something amazing must have happened to Xueqi, and it was very likely to be related to him. "Xueqi, what the hell happened? Tell me, tell me. Maybe I can help you." Li Yundong couldn't help shouting anxiously. But Xueqi did not speak. Her eyes became colder and colder, and her body trembled more and more violently. Li Yundong was about to ask more questions, but he heard a magnetic low voice coming from the door. "Don't ask any more. Let me tell you." Hearing this, Li Yundong turned his head and saw Xueqi standing at the door in a gray Chinese tunic suit, holding a hot water bottle in one hand and a freshly washed lunchbox in the other. Li Yundong looked at him in surprise. He didn't dare to compare Xueqi, who had been surrounded by so many people when he came to school last time, with this Xueqi in front of him, whose hair was a little gray at the temples and eyes were no longer as intimidating and dignified as usual. The former was a high-ranking official who had been in a high position for a long time, while the current one was just an ordinary middle-aged man who took care of patients. "You." Li Yundong stammered. He had an obvious feeling in his mind, but he didn't dare to confirm this result. Xueqi put down the things in his hands. He looked at Li Yundong with a complicated look and said, "Come out and talk." Li Yundong glanced at Xueqi, stood up, and followed Xueqi out of the ward. Xueqi walked in front of them and didn't speak all the way. When they walked out of the hospital building and came to the lawn downstairs, he pointed to the bench beside the cobblestone path and said, "Sit here." After Li Yundong sat down, he couldn't wait to ask, "Deputy Governor Zhou, what on earth?" Xueqi didn't wait for him to finish. He waved his hand and said lightly, "I'm no longer a deputy governor. I'm just an ordinary person now." Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He asked tentatively, "Uncle Zhou, what happened? Can you tell me?" Xueqi wasn't in a hurry to answer. He searched his body and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. Just as he was about to light one, he seemed to remember something. He shook it at Li Yundong and asked, "Can I smoke?" Li Yundong said yes. Xueqi smiled. Just as he was about to light the cigarette, he heard Li Yundong say, "But Uncle Zhou, have you been having tinnitus recently? Your eyes are sometimes blurred, and your nose is a little hot when you breathe?" Xueqi was stunned and stopped lighting the cigarette. He looked at Li Yundong in confusion and curiosity. Yes, how did you know? Li Yundong said, Uncle Zhou, the ears belong to the kidneys, the eyes belong to the liver, and the nose belongs to the lungs. Your tinnitus means that your kidneys are not good. Your eyes are blurred, which means that your liver is not good. Go to the internet. If a person's liver and kidneys are not good, then he is already suffering from a disease of great deficiency. If you still smoke, your lungs will also become bad. If a person's lungs are not good, then his nose will also be bad. The accompanying symptom is that the breath he exhales will be hot. This was the first time that Xueqi had dealt with Li Yundong. He hadn't expected that this young boy would have such a deep understanding of traditional Chinese medicine. Xueqi laughed and said, I've been smoking for decades. If it was bad, it would have been bad long ago. Although he said so, he still put away the cigarette. Xueqi looked Li Yundong up and down. After a while, he sighed and said, Don't you want to know what happened? Li Yundong nodded. Xueqi sighed and then slowly told him what had happened to Zhou Qin after Li Yundong left. When he talked about the failure of Zhou Qin's negotiation with him, Xueqi sighed and said, I should have expected it. Li Jiandong was shocked when he heard this. He hadn't expected that he would cause such a violent turmoil and bring such a terrible disaster to Zhou Qin and the Zhou family. A rising family had fallen because of him. Li Yundong was stunned on the spot, and his mind was in a mess. When he heard Xueqi's words, he subconsciously asked, Expected what? A trace of regret and pain flashed in Xueqi's eyes. He raised his head and looked at the blue sky, as if he was recalling something. When Qin was born, my brother found a master to help her name. At that time, the master said that Qin was a metal element and had a murderous aura between her eyebrows. In the future, her character would be strong and she would rather break than bend. In order to reduce her murderous aura, he named her Zhou Qin. Xueqi smiled bitterly. At that time I was young and arrogant, and I was an atheist. Of course I scoffed at this. I felt that Zhou Qin sounded too weak. I, Xueqi, wanted to name my daughter more domineering than others, so I changed her name to Zhou Qin. She was named after the Qin dynasty, the ruler of the world. Li Yundong, who was listening attentively, also sighed and said, Looking forward to a daughter becoming a phoenix and a son becoming a dragon is what parents desire. Zhou Qin does have the bearing of a big family. Xueqi sighed. What a pity, it was my desire that turned around and harmed her. For so many years, I have constantly imposed my wishes and will on her. I hope that she will follow my path and take over my job, but I have never asked her for her opinion. At first, she was very obedient, but until... Xueqi turned his face and looked at Li Yundong. He said slowly, Until she met you, she began to show more and more rebellious psychology. No, it should be said that the true self in the depths of her heart began to awaken. She longed for freedom, and she longed to pursue her own love. Love. Xueqi shook his head, and there was a bitter smile at the corner of his mouth. It's really something that makes people crazy. For this thing, just like what that master said, she did something that she would rather break than bend. Li Yundong's heart tightened. He asked, What happened? Xueqi looked straight at Li Yundong and said firmly, Under the aggressive pressure of the He family, the task force focused all the pressure on Qin. They believed that if they put a little more pressure on this girl, she would collapse, and they would get the answer they wanted. In this way, they could naturally lay their hands on you. Li Yundong's heart tightened when he heard this. He asked, and then? Xueqi was silent for a while. Then he said slowly then. Qin realized that things could not be good, so she decided to use her own death to calm everything down. She told the task force that she had decided to confess everything, asked for a pen and paper, and then asked the task force to leave her alone. Xueqi smiled bitterly. But as soon as the task force left, she quickly wrote a few words on the paper, and then she jumped from the window on the 4th floor. What? Li Yundong was so shocked that he jumped to his feet. Although Li Yundong hadn't seen this scene with his own eyes, at this moment, Li Yundong was shocked by Zhou Qin's determination to jump and her determination to break rather than bend. Seeing Li Yundong's reaction, Xueqi asked, Do you know what Zhou Qin wrote before she jumped? Li Yundong asked in shock. What words? Xueqi said word by word, It was written, The killer, Zhou Qin. Although Li Yundong had a deep understanding of Zhou Qin, he still underestimated the power that this girl could burst out. For his sake, she had actually shouldered such a great disaster on his own head. Xueqi looked at the extremely shocked expression on Li Yundong's face. Suddenly, the indignation and resentment in his heart dissipated a lot. To be fair, if one didn't look at his background, the boy in front of him was indeed worthy of Xueqi's love. He was indeed an extremely outstanding boy in modern society. However, was it worth it to pay such a big price for loving someone? Li Yundong was shocked for a long time before he came to his senses. He turned his head to look at Xueqi and asked incredulously, "Don't you hate me for getting you into this?" Xueqi glanced at Li Yundong. "In the first few days, I wanted to shoot you. However, after everything had settled down, I suddenly saw the light. Heh, isn't this how the ups and downs of the world work? Now I want to take Qin abroad to see a doctor and try to help her stand up on her own in the future." Li Yundong was shocked again. "She can't stand up?" Xueqi said in a heavy voice. Her spine was damaged. The doctor said that she was very lucky. There were no serious injuries elsewhere, but she was also very unlucky. There was a congestion tumor between the 10th and 11th vertebrae. The existing medical means can't remove it. If it is forcibly removed, there is a risk of paralysis in the future. Li Yundong's face was as dark as water. He was silent for a while, then said in a low voice, "I'll go and see Xueqi." As he said this, he walked quickly to the ward. When he got there, he found Xueqi lying in the ward, and her wheelchair had also fallen to one side. The girl was struggling to crawl forward on the ground, her eyes fixed on the glass on the cabinet not far away. Li Yundong's heart trembled at this moment. He quickly stepped forward, picked her up, and put her back in the wheelchair. Xueqi, who had rushed over, couldn't help sighing. He said, "Why are you so stubborn? Why didn't you ask the nurse to help you? Why did you have to be so stubborn?" Xueqi's lips were tightly pressed together. Her face was as cold as frost, and there were tears in her eyes. However, she stubbornly held them back, and her eyes were a little red. Xueqi didn't want Li Yundong to see her like this, so she turned her face away. However, the moment Li Yundong held Xueqi in his arms, he suddenly felt a familiar aura in Xueqi's body faintly responding to him. Li Yundong couldn't help reaching out to feel the pulse on Xueqi's wrist. With this, he suddenly found that there was his Renyuan Jindan's qi in Xueqi's body. Li Yundong was stunned for a moment, and then he remembered that when he had first reached the Zhuji phase, Xueqi had boldly separated him from Su Chan. It must have been at that time that his Renyuan Jindan's qi had poured into her body. Li Yundong's heart suddenly skipped a beat. He couldn't help thinking, although she has been seriously injured, her bones and internal organs are intact. She has Virgin Shenin qi and my Jindan's qi in her body. Her qi is so strong that it's impossible for the blood clots and tumors in her spine not to dissipate. As soon as this thought flashed through his mind, Li Yundong understood. "I know, it must be because Xueqi doesn't know how to use her qi, so she doesn't know it. If I use my qi to dispel her hematoma, she will be able to stand up again." /om/ Chapter 224. Go to watch net. According to traditional Chinese medicine, the reason why people had blood clots and tumors was most likely because the qi was not smooth and the blood was not flowing well. If the blood was not flowing well, the meridians would be blocked, the qi and blood would accumulate, and the tumors would grow. These days, Li Yundong had been reading many ancient books, most of which were related to Buddhism and Taoism. Although many of the Taoist books were about the mysterious cultivation techniques, most of them were about the most basic knowledge of cultivation, traditional Chinese medicine. Therefore, Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat and he immediately thought of a way to help Xueqi stand up again. He straightened up and said softly to her, "Don't worry, I'll come to see you again. Go to watch net." 7K. OM. Although Li Yundong felt that he had a way to cure Xueqi, he was not sure and wanted to confirm it with Zi Yuan, so he didn't tell her. He walked to the door and said hello to Xueqi. Just as he was about to go out, he suddenly heard Xueqi say coldly, "Don't come here again." Li Yundong was stunned at the door. He hadn't expected that the first thing Xueqi said would be this. He was stunned for a moment, but he quickly understood that this stubborn and proud girl obviously didn't want him to see her in such a sorry state at this time. Li Yundong smiled and didn't say anything. He went out by himself. Xueqi watched Li Yundong leave. He sighed and handed the cup to Xueqi. Qin, is it worth it? Xueqi bit her lips and remained silent. Her fingers that were holding the cup were trembling and turning white. Li Yundong returned home. As soon as he entered the door he shouted, Ziyuan, Ziyuan. But he turned around in the room, but he couldn't see Ziyuan. Li Yundong rushed to the balcony and shouted at the balcony of Ruan Hongling's house. Ziyuan. He shouted twice, but there was no response from the other side of the house. Just as he was about to fly over, he heard the sound of the door lock. He turned his head and saw Ziyuan wearing a casual white sportswear. She was carrying bags of vegetables in her hand, and there was a fish jumping in one of the plastic bags. Go to watch net. 7K. Although Li Yundong was in a bad mood, he couldn't help laughing when he saw her like this. You look like a housewife. Ziyuan rolled her eyes at Li Yundong, which was a rare sight. Obviously, what Li Yundong said last night still made her feel uncomfortable. Li Yundong saw that she was ignoring him and walked to the kitchen alone. He coughed dryly and stopped joking. By the way, I want to ask you something. Ziyuan was skillfully busy in the kitchen. She said casually, go ahead. As she spoke, she did not turn around and was still busy in the kitchen. Li Yundong looked at her busy figure at the door and suddenly felt strange in his heart. Ziyuan was like the hostess of the house, and he was like a guest. He told Ziyuan about Xueqi's situation, and then told her his own thoughts and opinions. Finally he said, do you think my method will work? Will she recover if we clear the blood clots and tumors in her spine? Ziyuan was washing vegetables with her back to Li Yundong. After hearing this, she stopped, turned around, and thought for a moment. Then she said, in theory, it's feasible. However, even if you can cure her, what can you do? Li Yundong was stunned. What do you mean? The expression on Ziyuan's face was indifferent. She wiped her hands on the apron in front of her and asked, even if she can stand up again, what can she do? She had lost all of her past, lost everything. Could she go back to her previous life? And Ziyuan gave Li Yundong a meaningful look. And, can you give her what she really wants? Li Yundong's whole body shook, and he fell into deep thought. It was not that Li Yundong didn't know that Xueqi liked him, but he really didn't expect that Xueqi would pay so much for him. This kind of sacrifice was so deep that he could hardly repay it. Ziyuan sighed slightly, and her tone seemed to have seen through the affairs of the world. She said lightly, you can cure her external injuries, but you can't cure her internal injuries. Go to the internet. Don't tell me you're going to repay me with your body? Li Yundong immediately said firmly, when I went to the hospital to see Zhao Yujian last time, I heard Ding Nan say something outside the ward. She said, love is not charity. You don't have to love whoever is pitiful. I love Xueqi, and she also loves me. This has not changed, and it will not change in the future. Ziyuan took a deep look at Li Yundong and sighed. My master once told me that the world of mortals is bitter, but the most bitter is love. He said that cultivators must not indulge in worldly love, otherwise it will be difficult for them to have great cultivation and achievements in the future. Li Yundong's face was full of seriousness. He retorted, I don't think so. I am a novice cultivator, but in my opinion, I think the reason why you cultivators cultivate is purely for the sake of cultivation. You have never thought about why I should cultivate. Your master said that the world of mortals is bitter, but the most bitter is love. Do you believe him? Have you ever tasted love? You haven't even tasted love. How can you say that love is bitter? Ziyuan was stunned. She subconsciously asked, I saw that when you and Xueqi parted, the two of you were sad and gloomy. Tears fell like rain. Even as an outsider, I can feel the pain in your heart. If this isn't bitterness, then what is? When Li Yundong heard her mention Xueqi, he couldn't help but show a hint of softness in his eyes. He said, in life, there is nothing perfect. You only see the separation of life and death, so you think that life is bitter. You only see the reunion and separation of love, so you think that the most bitter is love. But, have you ever seen the sweetness and happiness between two people when they are together? Have you ever seen the joy and joy of their love being satisfied in an instant when they meet again? The more Li Yundong spoke, the softer his voice became. His eyes were lost in thought, as if he had leaped to the near future, to the days after he brought Xueqi back. He said, why should I cultivate? Because I know that if I don't cultivate, I won't be able to protect myself, let alone my girl. Once something happens, we will have to face the scene of reunion and separation again. I don't want to see such a scene again, so I want to cultivate. Li Yundong said, you can think that I have no future, or that I don't want to make progress, but I am like this. I want to be a cultivator who only envies lovers, not immortals. All the motivation for my cultivation now is to make myself stronger as soon as possible, get through the heavenly tribulation, and then be with my girl. I will take good care of her and make sure that she doesn't get hurt again. Zi Yuan was stunned by Li Yundong's words. She felt that something deeply rooted in her heart had been shaken by Li Yundong. She couldn't help murmuring, Master has been telling me this since I was a child. Is he wrong? Impossible, how could Master be wrong? He has never been wrong. Li Yundong saw that Zi Yuan, who had always been wise and calm, was at a loss at this time. He couldn't help saying, is your master always right? If he is right in everything, why did he marry Ao Wushuang back then? Zi Yuan's body shook, and her eyes widened, unable to speak. Li Yundong suddenly looked at Zi Yuan sympathetically and said, you said it yourself. If you don't experience the world, how can you know what it feels like? Looking at you like this, let me ask you boldly. Have you ever been in love? Do you know what it feels like to be in love between two people? Can you understand the feeling of being willing to give up everything for the other party? Zi Yuan was stunned by Li Yundong's question. She was stunned, and her mind was in a mess. She subconsciously asked, didn't Zhou Qin give up everything for you? How will you repay her? There was a deep and thoughtful look in Li Yundong's eyes. He sighed softly and said, she ruined herself and her life for me. So, I have to give it all back to her. I caused her to be unable to stand up, so I must make her stand up again. I caused her to lose her life of luxury, so I must give her another life that can be compared to it. Zi Yuan came to her senses. She realized something and asked tentatively, are you going to teach her cultivation? Li Yundong nodded heavily. Yes. Zi Yuan took a deep breath and said slowly, since you've made your decision, I won't say anything more. As she spoke, she turned around and continued to wash vegetables, but her movements were slow and stiff. She seemed to be very inattentive, as if she was thinking about something. Li Yundong stood at the door for a while. He thought of a few professional medical questions and asked, how can the blood tumor in the spine dissipate? Zi Yuan didn't look back, nor did she stop what she was doing. She said casually, ordinary people need to use gold or silver needles, and those with weaker skills need to use bone needles. The qi in your body is too strong, so you just need to massage the surrounding acupoints. Li Yundong smiled. Actually, I think so too, but I can't make up my mind, so I don't dare to act rashly. Zi Yuan said lightly. Then go and do it. Li Yundong replied in a deep voice. I'll go tomorrow. Li Yundong was about to turn around and leave when Zi Yuan suddenly stopped. She turned around and said with a confused face, Li Yundong, what does love taste like? Why do so many people say it's bitter? But why do so many people taste it? Even my master is no exception? Li Yundong smiled slightly. Why don't you go and taste it yourself? Others tell you 1,000 times, but it's not as good as experiencing it once. After that, he turned and walked out of the kitchen. Zi Yuan stood there in a daze. Her eyes were blurred, and she sighed softly in her heart. There seemed to be a myriad of emotions between her brows, but in the end, it turned into a faint confusion. /om/ Chapter 225. Go to watch net. The next day, Li Yundong skipped his morning classes and headed straight for the People's Hospital after buying some fruits. Watch net. 7K.O. Hong. OM. Just as he was about to reach the hospital, he noticed someone selling pets on the side of the road. He couldn't help but stop to take a look. After thinking for a while, he took out some money and bought a pair of hamsters. Then, carrying the cage, he rushed to the hospital. As soon as he walked into the building, he saw a strong nurse yelling at him. Hey, you're not allowed to bring pets in. Hey, I'm talking to you, what's wrong with you? Li Yundong paused, then pointed at himself. Me. The nurse said rudely, nonsense, who else could it be? What is this place? Can I bring pets in? Li Yundong feigned a troubled expression. Then where should I put it? The nurse turned her head, pointed to a place and said, "Put it there." But when she turned her head again, Li Yundong was nowhere to be seen. After avoiding the nurse, Li Yundong no longer entered the ward casually. He carefully hid the cage behind him. When he arrived at Xueqi's ward, he saw that she was lying on the bed, drinking the porridge that had been cooked. Beside her, Xueqi was looking at her lovingly and sadly. As soon as Li Yundong entered the door, Xueqi's gaze followed him. In an instant, a burst of joy burst out in her eyes, but it was quickly hidden. Instead, it was replaced by a coldness that could freeze people's bones. Seeing him, Xueqi coughed dryly and said to Xueqi, "I have something to do. You guys talk first." He entered the room and put away the cage in his hand and the fan of 7 treasures on his back. Then, he greeted Xueqi with a smile. However, Xueqi did not appreciate it. She said coldly, "Didn't I tell you not to come again?" Li Yundong smiled. "You're my friend. How could I not come?" "Friends?" Xueqi sneered. She suddenly laughed at herself and said, "Do I still have friends?" "Ha ha ha." Li Yundong looked at her with a gentle expression. He picked up the knife beside the table and an apple. Without asking if she wanted it, he began to peel it himself. As he peeled, he asked, "How can there be no fruit? Am I not?" Xueqi sneered and said, "You have to think carefully before you speak. I'm like a plague now. Everyone avoids me." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Everyone in the world can avoid you, but I can't. You're like this because of me. If I hide from you, then what's the difference between me and a beast like young Master He?" Xueqi was stunned. The coldness in her eyes softened a little, but it soon became cold again. She said in a cold voice, "That's none of your business. This is my own choice." "It's none of your business. Are you here to laugh at me to laugh at me?" Li Yundong knew that Xueqi was a proud princess who was usually high and mighty. At this time, she was suddenly knocked into the dust, so she must not be able to come to terms with it. He smiled and said, "Don't talk so much. Come on, have an apple. Watch net." Seeing that he didn't answer her at all, she couldn't help but say angrily, "I don't want to eat apples." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Then what do you want to eat?" When Xueqi saw Li Yundong's faint smile, she didn't know why, but she felt as if there were sharp needles piercing her heart. She wanted to curse like a shrew, say the worst words, and use the most destructive and humiliating words to drive the boy in front of her away. But when the words were on the tip of her tongue, Xueqi couldn't say them no matter what. Deep in her heart, a voice echoed faintly, "If I really drive him away and he never comes back, what should I do?" Xueqi gritted her teeth, pointed to the fruit basket next to her, and said, "I want to eat bananas." Li Yundong quickly took a banana for her and peeled the skin off, but Xueqi took the banana and threw it on the ground without looking at it. "I want to eat pears." Li Yundong was stunned, but he quickly reacted. This girl can't turn around and is throwing a tantrum. Li Yundong smiled and said, Okay. Then, he went to get a pear. Xueqi said, "I don't eat it with the skin on." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Okay, I'll peel it for you." He finished peeling the pear and handed it to Xueqi. Xueqi grabbed it and threw it on the ground again. "I want to eat bananas." Li Yundong looked at the peeled pear on the ground. His expression was indifferent, and he didn't move. Seeing that he didn't move, Xueqi thought that he was angry, so she sneered and said, "What, you can't stand it? If you can't stand it, then leave. I don't want to see you." At this time, Li Yundong turned his face and smiled at her. He didn't say anything, but still took another banana, peeled it, and handed it over. "Go to the internet." 7K. OM. Seeing him like this, for some reason, Xueqi became even angrier. She grabbed it and threw it to the ground. Then she looked at Li Yundong angrily. "I want to eat pineapples." Li Yundong smiled and turned to get the pineapple. After peeling it, he handed it to Xueqi. As expected, Xueqi took the pineapple and threw it outside. At the same time she shouted, "I want to eat bananas." The pineapple was thrown outside with a bang, and the patients and nurses in the corridor were so scared that they shouted, "Hey, what the hell is going on inside? Don't throw the fruit around." Xueqi roared, "What are you shouting for? I want to throw my fruit." What's it to you? In this day and age, the fierce were afraid of the stupid, and the stupid were afraid of the desperate. As soon as Xueqi shouted, the outside suddenly fell silent. Li Yundong smiled and said, "Well, what a scary roar." Xueqi sneered and said, "Yes, I am a shrew who roars like a lion. Is this the first day you've met me?" Li Yundong responded with a and nodded. Then, he turned around again. He glanced at the fruit, then turned back and said with a grievance, "The bananas are gone." At first, when Xueqi saw that Li Yundong had actually nodded, she suddenly became angry. But soon, when she saw his aggrieved expression and said that the bananas were gone, she couldn't help but want to laugh. But she quickly held it back and said with a cold face, "Then I want to eat peaches." Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "How can there be peaches in this season?" Xueqi said with a straight face, "I don't care. I want to eat peaches." Li Yundong sighed and took an apple from the fruit basket. Then, he sat on the edge of the bed with his legs crossed, peeling it and humming a tune. Xueqi saw that he was holding an apple and was peeling it hard. She couldn't help but say angrily, "I said I want to eat peaches." Li Yundong nodded, but he still didn't move. He continued to hum a tune and peel the apple. Xueqi was so angry that her eyebrows raised. "Are you deaf? I want to eat peaches." Li Yundong slowly peeled the apple, then threw the skin into the trash can and took a bite. He looked at Xueqi with a strange expression and said, "Did I say that I was peeling this for you?" Xueqi was stunned. She subconsciously wanted to laugh, but as soon as the corners of her mouth curled up, she held it back. She glared at him and was about to lose her temper when she suddenly heard a shout from outside. "Well, I was wondering which guy came here to make trouble. It turns out to be you." Li Yundong turned his head and saw the strong nurse downstairs standing at the door with her hands on her hips and sleeves rolled up. She was about to rush in aggressively. Li Yundong stood up and quickly waved his hands. "Don't come in," the fat nurse sneered. As she spoke, she rushed into the room. "Do you think I won't come in just because you told me not to? Yoop." Before she could finish her words, she suddenly stepped on the banana that Xueqi had thrown on the ground. With a sizzling sound, she fell to the ground on her back like a mountain of gold and jade. The shoes under her feet flew up and hit her heavily in the face. At this time, Li Yundong said with a look of grievance and sympathy, "I told you not to come in." Xueqi couldn't help laughing anymore. As soon as she laughed twice, she saw Li Yundong looking at her. Xueqi's face suddenly became serious, but not long after, she saw the fat nurse twisting her body to get up from the ground while cursing. Her funny appearance immediately made Xueqi burst into laughter again. Xueqi couldn't help laughing. She didn't want Li Yundong to see her laugh, so she pulled out the pillow behind her and covered her face with it. Her whole body trembled with laughter. The fat nurse got up from the ground, pointed at Li Yundong, and shouted furiously, "You bastard, did you deliberately throw this banana on the ground?" Li Yundong smiled apologetically and said, "Don't jump, don't jump. Be careful not to fall again." The fat nurse had fallen a little hard just now. She looked at her feet with lingering fear. Her appearance suddenly made Xueqi, who had finally stopped laughing. She lifted the pillow and burst into laughter again. The fat nurse laughed so hard that she couldn't pull her face down, but she couldn't directly lose her temper at the patient. The door was full of people pointing at the inside, covering their mouths and snickering. She was so angry that for a moment, she forgot to ask Li Yundong to bring in a pet. She thought to herself, "Damn it, those B*cheese want me to deal with this damn thing. They really don't have good intentions. I don't care anymore." Thinking of this, she stomped her feet and angrily said, "Just you wait and see." After saying that, she rolled away like a mountain of flesh. Seeing her go out, Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. He used the broom in the room to sweep the fruit that had been thrown on the ground and then dumped it into the trash can. After Xueqi stopped laughing, she kept covering her face with a pillow, leaving only a pair of eyes exposed. She watched Li Yundong busy in the room, and for a moment, she couldn't help but look at him more and more softly. When Li Yundong was done, he looked at her. Xueqi immediately avoided his eyes in panic, but soon found that something was wrong and stared back at him fiercely. Li Yundong smiled and said, "Why are you staring at me? What other fruit do you want to eat?" Xueqi said bitterly, "I want to eat peaches." Li Yundong said, "Oh, then turned around and took out an apple from the fruit basket, slowly peeling it. When Xueqi saw this, she suddenly became angry. She said bitterly, "Why do you only care about eating? Who is injured here?" Li Yundong just nodded and didn't say anything. He still slowly crossed his legs, peeled the apple, and hummed a little tune. Seeing him like this, Xueqi was so angry that she threw the pillow in her arms at his face, and her face turned white with anger. After Li Yundong peeled the apple, he pulled the apple skin as if he was asking for credit and said with a smile, "Dang, dang. The fresh apple is peeled." Xueqi sneered, closed her eyes and thought to herself, "It must be for yourself again. Are you trying to fool me again?" But not long after she closed her eyes, she suddenly felt something cold and wet touch the corner of her mouth. Xueqi opened her eyes and saw Li Yundong smiling at her. He said softly, "There are no peaches now, only a peeled apple. You can make do with it. I'll buy you one next year, okay?" In Xueqi's impression, Li Yundong had never spoken to her like this. This boy was polite to her, but it was only out of courtesy and etiquette. When had he ever spoken to her so gently? Xueqi looked at Li Yundong blankly, a little dazed for a moment. Seeing that she didn't respond, Li Yundong said, "You don't want it? If you don't want it, I'll throw it away." But Xueqi suddenly reacted, grabbed it, and took a fierce bite, as if to vent her hatred. This bite was so big that she bit her tongue. The sweetness of the apple was mixed with the saltiness of blood. Xueqi couldn't help but think to herself, "Is this the taste of love? I've done so much for him, and now I can finally get him to peel an apple for me?" Thinking of this, Xueqi couldn't help but burst into tears. As she cried, she bit the apple and said vaguely, "Li Yundong, you're so annoying, you're so annoying, /om/." Chapter 226. Go to Watch Network. This was the first time that Li Yundong had seen Xueqi cry in front of him. In the past, he couldn't imagine what this high and mighty, strong and proud girl looked like when she was crying. But at this time, the girl's tears fell like pearls from a broken necklace. Li Yundong was already feeling guilty, and at this time, he couldn't help but feel sad. He reached out and gently stroked Xueqi's soft long hair, saying softly, "It will be fine. Everything will be fine. Cheer up." No matter how strong and mature a girl pretended to be, they would always have a weak and fragile side. Especially when they were facing the person they liked, this kind of weakness and fragility would be more easily revealed. The same was true for Xueqi. Hearing Li Yundong's surprisingly gentle comfort, Xueqi could no longer keep a straight face to him. She held the apple in both hands and nodded with tears falling like rain. Li Yundong smiled and reached out to wipe the tears on her face. As soon as his hand touched Xueqi's skin, she couldn't help but tremble. It was as if Li Yundong's hand had electricity. A short touch made her whole body numb and her heart agitated. Xueqi's body trembled and her face subconsciously shrank, but as soon as she shrank, she regretted it in her heart. However, she couldn't save face and was too embarrassed to move closer. Xueqi saw that Li Yundong's hand was frozen in place and did not continue to reach out. She suddenly felt bitter in her heart. "Can't you go further?" Li Yundong withdrew his frozen hand in the air and smiled embarrassedly. "Don't cry. You're such a beautiful girl. It's not good for you to cry too much and become ugly." Xueqi wiped away her tears and said angrily, "It's none of your business." Li Yundong smiled and said, Yes, I don't care. I can't control you." Xueqi snorted and wiped away her tears. Her face became cold again, but her voice was obviously warm. "What are you doing here? Didn't I tell you not to come?" Li Yundong sighed with a smile. "I already know what happened. How can I not come?" Xueqi smiled bitterly. "What can you solve if you come? Can I stand up again? Can I go back to my old life?" Li Yundong said, "I don't know if I can go back to my previous life, but I can help you stand up again." How could Xueqi believe his words? The expression on her face slowly became indifferent again. She sighed and said, "It's useless. My attending doctor has already said that I will never be able to stand up again in this life." Watch net. Color *** literature under learning % super #speed. Update. He was silent for a while. He just picked up the pet cage he had bought downstairs and placed it in front of Xueqi. He smiled and said, "Don't think too much. You used to be very optimistic. Why have you become pessimistic now? There is nothing impossible in this world. It all depends on whether you are willing to do it or not. Then, he pointed at the little hamster that was running on wheels in the cage. He smiled and said, "Look, even it knows to exercise to protect itself. How can you give up?" Li Yundong's words warmed Xueqi's heart, but she still couldn't help retorting, "They have been running on wheels like this all their lives. Can they run a meter away? They will always be in the same place, and they will never be able to escape from this cage." Li Yundong fixed his eyes on Xueqi and said softly, "No, Xueqi, they don't have the strength to break free from the shackles of this cage. But haven't you already jumped out of the previous cage?" Thinking of this, Xueqi couldn't help but feel an inexplicable pain in her heart. It took a lot of courage and a moment of impulse to take this step, but if she fell to her death, it would be over. But now she woke up and found that she had nothing. How could she face the future? How could she face the future? Yes, she was indeed free, but the price of this freedom was too high. Xueqi suddenly thought of Neo in the Matrix. He used to live in a world controlled by robots. Although he was ignorant and had no freedom at all, he lived a happy life. But when he suddenly broke free from this world, he suddenly found that the real world of freedom was so cold and cruel. Was it all worth it? Xueqi sat there blankly, motionless and silent. After a long time she said slowly, "So what if I jumped out?" Li Yundong knew that although Xueqi's mood was much better than before, she still couldn't get over it. He didn't force her. He just smiled and said, "It will be fine. With me here, you will get better." When Xueqi heard this, her whole body trembled. She couldn't help but look at Li Yundong with infatuation and softness in her eyes. No matter what, he has treated me much better after all. What I have done is not in vain. Go to the internet. Although Xueqi didn't believe it in her heart, she still smiled slightly. Her smile was sweet and beautiful. Li Yundong wanted to make Xueqi happy, so he kept talking and laughing with her. He picked up some jokes and interesting things to tell her, which made her giggle all the time. Xueqi, who was about to come in at the door, took a look and stopped, then turned to leave. He sighed in his heart, sure enough, girls are extroverted. It's useless to say 10,000 words. When her lover comes, she immediately smiles. When a girl grows up, she can't be kept at home. It's a pity. It's too late. Xueqi sighed with emotion. He slowly walked downstairs and sat down on a stool by the roadside, his eyes fixed on her. After a long time, a person suddenly sat down next to Xueqi. Xueqi didn't turn his face, but said in a deep voice, "Sorry, can you leave me alone for a while?" "What's wrong, old Zhou? Are you turning your back on me so soon?" A magnetic baritone sounded from the side. Xueqi turned his head and saw a middle-aged man with a square face smiling at him. Xueqi was shocked. "Old Li? Why are you here?" Old Li chuckled, took out a pack of cigarettes from his pocket, and handed it over. "I came to see you, an old friend. Do you want one?" Xueqi reached out to take the cigarette, but his hand stopped in mid-air. He smiled and said, "Forget it, I won't smoke anymore. I quit smoking." Old Li looked at him strangely. "When did you quit?" Xueqi smiled. "Just now." After Old Li lit the cigarette, he took a puff and slowly exhaled a ring of smoke. He sighed slightly and said, "Old Zhou, I know you have resentment in your heart, but don't think too much about it. You have to look at the big picture, right?" Xueqi smiled bitterly. "I've already gotten over it. There's nothing wrong with retiring like this. In the past, I was too obsessed with being an official. I didn't handle my relationship with the He family well, nor did I handle my relationship with my daughter well. This is my fate. I accept it." Old Li snorted and said, "The He family has gone too far this time. The He family has no descendants, but young master he brought this upon himself. Do you want the Zhou family to have no descendants as well?" Xueqi smiled and said, "Old Li, it's all thanks to your help this time. Otherwise, the consequences would have been unimaginable." Old Li laughed and said, "What are you talking about? The eyes of the masses are clear. No matter what, Xueqi has put herself in danger, and you have also put yourself in danger. What else do they want? If the He family wants to be naughty again, I'll be the first to object." Xueqi smiled with emotion and said, "This is what it means to see a friend in need." Old Li snorted and said, "What trouble? You won't even give me a cigarette." Xueqi laughed and said, "I won't smoke anymore. How about we play a game of chess?" Old Li slapped his thigh and said, "Okay, that's what I like. As the saying goes, life is like chess and chess is like life. Old Zhou, let's have a good talk today and experience life in chess. You know, winning and losing in life are common sense. Although you have lost a lot in front of you, it doesn't mean that you can't make a comeback." The two middle-aged men from the system found a stone platform under the inpatient building and began to play. In the ward, Li Yundong brought hot food and placed it in front of Xueqi. Xueqi looked at the dishes in front of her and suddenly said childishly, "These dishes are not delicious." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Then what do you want to eat? I'll buy it for you." Xueqi rolled her eyes. She wanted to make things difficult for Li Yundong, so she said, "I want to eat the food you cook." As expected, Li Yundong showed a look of embarrassment. He hesitated for a moment and asked, "Are you hungry now?" Xueqi pushed the lunchbox in front of her and said, "No, I want to eat the food you cook." Li Yundong thought for a moment and nodded. "Then wait for me for a while." As he said this, he carried the fan of 7 treasures on his back and walked out. Seeing that he was really leaving, Xueqi reached out and called out, but she didn't have time to stop him. She couldn't help but think, is he really going? I was just saying it casually. Will he be angry if I order him around like this? Xueqi's heart was filled with gains and losses. She felt that time was passing like a year. In just an hour, she felt as if she had waited for a century. It wasn't until Li Yundong's figure appeared in the room again that her heart returned to her chest. "Sorry to keep you waiting," Li Yundong said with a smile. He took out a few sealed lunchboxes from the plastic bag he was carrying and put them in front of Xueqi. "In a hurry. I didn't have time to cook anything delicious. I only made a few home-cooked dishes. Do you want to eat them first? I'll cook something delicious for you another day." Xueqi opened the lunchbox and saw that there were steamed ribs, stir-fried lotus root slices, and stir-fried meat with radish inside. They were all ordinary dishes. According to Xueqi's life of luxury in the past, these were all things that were not pleasing to her eyes. However, Xueqi felt that the dishes in front of her were the best delicacies in the world, even though she hadn't tasted them yet. Xueqi couldn't wait to pick up the chopsticks and move her body reluctantly, wanting to have a taste. Seeing that it was inconvenient for her to move, Li Yundong leaned over and helped her sit up. Xueqi smiled at Li Yundong, picked up a piece of ribs, and put it into her mouth. She slowly and carefully tasted it. As she ate, her eyes suddenly turned red again. Li Yundong said exaggeratedly, "No way. Is my cooking so bad? Is it so bad that you want to cry?" Xueqi burst into laughter and spat the food on the bedsheet. She glared at Li Yundong with red eyes and said, "You're so annoying. You've dirted my sheets." Li Yundong said with an aggrieved expression, "You sprayed it." Xueqi said angrily, "It's all your fault." This sentence had a double meaning. Xueqi's words were unintentional, but Li Yundong was listening attentively. He sighed and said, "Yes, it's all my fault. Blame it on me." However, Xueqi didn't react. She felt like she had fallen in love for the first time. It was as if bickering with Li Yundong was the happiest thing in the world. At this time, she was winning, and she was even more delighted in her heart. She said angrily, "If I don't blame you, who should I blame? Humph, it's all your fault." These words made Li Yundong's heart tremble. He suddenly thought of Su Chan. The little girl had once nestled in his arms with a sweet smile, raised her head, and said coquettishly, "It's all your fault." Li Yundong's mood of joking with Xueqi gradually dissipated. He silently waited for Xueqi to finish eating, then asked, "Xueqi, shall I give you a massage? /om/" Chapter 227. Go to Watch Network. Hearing that Li Yundong was going to give her a massage, Xueqi was obviously stunned. Although she didn't know why Li Yundong was doing this, she nodded gently out of love and trust for Li Yundong. 7K. Oath M. Xueqi's neck was slightly red. She asked softly, "Do I have to lie on my stomach?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "No, as long as you can sit on the chair." Xueqi forced a smile and said, "Then you have to help me. I can't do it alone." Li Yundong understood. He came to the bedside and held Xueqi's legs with one hand. One hand passed under her ribs and gently picked her up. Although Xueqi knew that Li Yundong was not really hugging her, she still felt a strong masculine smell blowing over her face, making her suddenly tremble slightly. Her hands involuntarily wrapped around Li Yundong's neck. Li Yundong's whole body tensed up. He didn't even dare to look at Xueqi's eyes. He just stiffly carried her to the wheelchair with a straight face. Then, he let out a long sigh of relief in his heart and quickly let go of her. Xueqi suddenly sat in the cold wheelchair from the warm embrace. The gap in her heart made her feel lost for a moment. Li Yundong pushed Xueqi to the corridor outside the ward so that she could breathe smoothly. Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Close your eyes. I'll give you a massage." Xueqi closed her eyes. She didn't know why Li Yundong suddenly wanted to give her a massage. She couldn't help feeling a little nervous, but in her nervousness, she was faintly looking forward to something. Li Yundong stretched out the palm of one hand and pressed it on the top of Xueqi's head. With a little qi, he transferred his vigorous and condensed Jindan's qi into Xueqi's body. Xueqi only felt that the top of her head was suddenly hot, and then there seemed to be a stream of hot air in her body, slowly rising and constantly rushing toward the top of her head. Then when the hot air in her body touched the hot air on the top of her head, Xueqi's body trembled violently. She felt as if there were countless mice in her body, constantly swimming in her blood vessels and meridians, making her feel itchy, hot, numb, and limp. If it had been anyone else, they would have been twisting their bodies at this time, screaming and laughing, unable to control themselves at all. However, Xueqi's willpower was extremely strong, and she managed to endure it. From the outside, Li Yunyang could only see a layer of fine sweat on her neck. Other than that, there was nothing unusual. He had massaged Su Chan and Chao Kefi before, so he naturally knew what it felt like when the Yuanyang qi entered the body. Although everyone's physique might have different reactions, it was absolutely not to the point where there was no reaction at all. Watch net. Chanjom, how is this possible? Li Yundong pondered for a while. He felt that maybe he hadn't injected enough Yuanyang qi. So Li Yundong accelerated the input of Yuanyang qi. In an instant, Xueqi felt as if someone had poured a basin of boiling water on top of her head, and the qi and blood in her body were surging like countless wild horses galloping wildly. An extremely vigorous and condensed heat flowed from the top of her head down her spine, penetrating step by step, like boiling mercury, pervasive. After this boiling heat encountered the extravasated blood and tumor between her spine, it paused for a moment. Then, Xueqi clearly felt that all the qi and blood in her body were revolving at a high speed around the tumor and extravasated blood. In the process of this high-speed rotation, at first, Xueqi only felt that the tumor and extravasated blood were a little swollen. Then, the heat began to burn until her waist began to slowly feel the heat. Gradually, Xueqi felt that the lower part of her waist began to slowly swell. This was no small matter. Xueqi suddenly understood. Li Yundong was helping her treat her injury. Does he also know medical skills? All the incredible things that she had witnessed happening to Li Yundong with her own eyes suddenly flashed through Xueqi's mind. She knew that Li Yundong was definitely not an ordinary person. What ordinary doctors could not do, he could do. Xueqi's originally dead heart suddenly blazed. It turned out that he was not comforting me. He really could cure my injury. She suddenly became wild with excitement. What could be more exciting than being able to let her stand up again? In this excitement, her feet suddenly moved. Although this movement was light, Xueqi was keenly aware of it. Xueqi almost cried with joy. Xueqi was so excited that she put her hands on the ground, subconsciously wanting to see if she could stand up on her own. But just as she was about to move, she heard Li Yundong's deep voice behind her. "Don't move. Take a deep breath and calm your breath." This sound was like a morning bell and evening drum, knocking heavily on Xueqi's heart. Xueqi's body suddenly tightened, and then slowly relaxed. Her hands on both sides of the wheelchair also slowly loosened. A frightening thought flashed through her mind. If I recover, will he stop talking to me and care about me? The reason why he is so obedient and gentle to me, is it because he sympathizes with me and pitied me? If that's the case. Xueqi's hand tightly gripped the armrest, and her fingers turned white. If that's the case, then I'd rather sit in a wheelchair like this for the rest of my life and let him take care of me and let him owe me. Go to the internet. 7K. OM. Thinking of this, Xueqi showed a sweet and sad smile. Her hand involuntarily touched her thigh and grabbed it hard. Xueqi faintly felt a trace of pain from this grab. She knew that her leg had begun to get better. The magic of traditional Chinese medicine was that it often had an excellent effect on some difficult and complicated diseases that Western medicine couldn't do anything about. If ordinary traditional Chinese medicine wanted to evacuate the tumors and extravasated blood in Xueqi's wound, they had to use acupuncture to stimulate her due meridian and the acupoints around the wound, thereby accelerating the flow of qi in the meridians and allowing the qi and blood to naturally take away the extravasated blood. However, Li Yundong had used his powerful aura to disperse the extravasated blood and tumors in Xueqi's body. Although this couldn't be done in one go, the method was right, and the effect was surprisingly fast. After Li Yundong transferred Yuanqi for as long as an hour, he began to stop. After a while he raised his hand, squatted in front of Xueqi, and asked, "How do you feel just now?" Xueqi opened her eyes and said with a smile, "I feel so hot all over." Li Yundong glanced at her and said, "Then hurry up and go into the room. It's windy outside. Don't let the wind blow into your body through your pores. That will become moisture, which will aggravate the condition." Xueqi smiled and said, "Okay." Li Yundong pushed Xueqi into the ward, then picked her up and prepared to put her on the bed. However, as soon as Li Yundong's hand touched Xueqi, he found that her clothes were already soaked, and even the hair on her neck was wet. Li Yundong frowned and picked up a towel by the bedside. "Can this towel be used to wipe sweat?" Xueqi nodded and stared at the towel in Li Yundong's hand. Suddenly, she looked a little shy, but also a little expectant. Li Yundong didn't react for a moment. He just wanted to help Xueqi wipe the sweat off her body. Just now, he had used his powerful Yuanyang qi to help Xueqi open up many acupoints and meridians in her body. At this time, Xueqi's pores were wide open. If the sweat was not wiped clean in time, when the sweat evaporated automatically, some of the water vapor would drill into the human body through the pores and finally enter the meridians, forming moisture. In traditional Chinese medicine, this was called dampness invading the body. Many people didn't pay attention to it when they were young. When it rained, they got wet, or when they sweated profusely after exercise and didn't have time to dry themselves. Then the moisture would enter the body, and when there was a problem with the bones, the moisture would flow along the qi and blood, causing rheumatism. Li Yundong was a cultivator, so he could get rid of the moisture through qi, but Xueqi was not. If there was moisture in her body at this time, and Li Yundong helped her get rid of it in the future, it would take several times more effort. Because the moisture could be transferred, it was like a thief that got into the human body. It would run around everywhere, going wherever there was a gap. If Li Yundong wanted to get rid of the moisture, he would have to spend several times more effort to find it first, and then he would have to spend several times more effort to get rid of the moisture. At this time, Li Yundong had subconsciously regarded himself as a doctor. As the saying goes, doctors have no taboo. Li Yundong didn't think too much about it. He picked up the towel and began to help Xueqi wipe the sweat on her back. At first, Li Yundong wiped the sweat on Xueqi's neck, and then he naturally extended the towel to her back to wipe it. There were many acupuncture points on the back of a person, so when they sweated, the back was often the first to sweat, and the sweat was also the most. Xueqi was wearing the hospital's uniform. The clothes were loose, so Li Yundong reached in and put his hand in. Xueqi let out a soft cry, and her body trembled slightly, but she quickly held back. Her delicate jade-like skin felt Li Yundong's gentle wiping. After he finished wiping the sweat on Xueqi's back, he wanted to help her wipe other places. But when he looked at Xueqi and was about to speak, he saw that Xueqi's face was flushed and her eyes were fixed on him. Her eyes were full of amorous emotions, and her sinuses were constantly moving. In particular, Xueqi's snow-white chest was exposed, and there was an attractive ravine in it that made his blood boil. Li Yundong's heart suddenly trembled. He knew that he had been too engrossed for a moment and had lost his composure. Li Yundong coughed dryly, handed the towel to Xueqi, and said awkwardly, "You can wipe your chest yourself." Xueqi's face turned red. She took the towel in a daze, but after a while, she suddenly came to her senses and buried her head in the pillow, not daring to look up at Li Yundong. Li Yundong saw that she was so shy that her neck was red, and her ears were so red that they seemed to be dripping blood. He felt more and more embarrassed and coughed dryly. You have to wipe the sweat away quickly, or it's not good for your health. Xueqi was like an ostrich. She suddenly pulled up the quilt and covered herself with it, then said in a trembling voice, "Turn around." Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. You're covering yourself so tightly. Do you think I have X-ray vision? With a swish, Xueqi threw a pillow from under the quilt at Li Yundong. She said in a trembling voice, "Turn around." Li Yundong caught the pillow and said with a wry smile, Okay, I'll turn around." Xueqi carefully poked her head out of the quilt and peeked at Li Yundong. Seeing that he had indeed turned around like a gentleman, she carefully put the towel into her clothes and gently wiped herself. With this wipe, Xueqi felt as if the towel was Li Yundong's hand, gently caressing her skin, causing her to tremble uncontrollably. Especially when she rubbed the soft peaks on her chest, her body trembled violently. Just as she was reminiscing, she suddenly heard Li Yundong cough and say, "Are you done? Don't take too long. It's not a joke for moisture to enter the body." Xueqi panicked. She quickly pulled out the towel and threw it at Li Yundong, saying angrily, "I'm done. Why are you rushing me?" Li Yundong caught it without looking back. As soon as he touched the towel, he felt a warm and moist feeling. His heart suddenly shook. This was the towel that Xueqi had used to wipe her chest just now. Although Li Yundong loved Xueqi deeply and his feelings for her had never wavered, he was still a human being after all. What's more, Xueqi had done so much for him. Even if he had a heart of stone, he would still be moved. At this moment, Li Yundong suddenly felt that the towel seemed to be fragrant and happy, and a faint virgin's desire rushed to his face. The moment Xueqi threw the towel, she also realized this. She was so shy that she shrank her head under the quilt, but after a while, she secretly peeked out a pair of eyes. She looked at the towel in Li Yundong's hand, and she was lost in thought. What is he thinking? Xueqi looked at Li Yundong in a daze. Her eyes couldn't help but become softer and softer, like the soft watergrass in a clear river, gently stirring the hard rocks by the river. At this moment, the ward was extremely quiet. Only a faint fragrance floated between the two of them, stirring their souls and seducing their hearts. Ahem. Stop guessing. This book has a happy ending. What kind of happy ending? It's very simple. Good people will be rewarded, and bad people will be punished. In addition, the next chapter is the grand debut of the little girl. /om/ Chapter 228. Go to watch net. This awkward and ambiguous atmosphere lasted until Xueqi entered the room. He looked at the two of them and coughed dryly. Only then did Li Yundong come to his senses. He coughed dryly and said to Xueqi, "Uncle Zhou, I'll come back tomorrow. Go to watch net." 7K. Oh. Hong. OM. Xueqi looked at him meaningfully and nodded. Well, that's good. You should accompany Qin more often. After all. He wanted to say, after all, she has done so much for you. He wanted to use these words to warn Li Yundong not to be ungrateful. However, Xueqi was keenly aware of what Xueqi was going to say next. She quickly said, "Li Yundong, if you have something to do tomorrow, you don't have to come. I'm fine." Li Yundong had already gotten up and walked to the door. He turned around and smiled. It doesn't matter. I have nothing to do tomorrow anyway. After that, he ran away as if he wanted to escape. Xueqi looked at Li Yundong's departing figure and sighed. Why are you so stubborn? If you don't say it clearly, some people will never understand it, or pretend not to understand it. After Li Yundong left, Xueqi's face seemed to be wearing a mask again. She said coldly, "It's none of your business. I don't want this kind of thing that I beg for. If I want something, I always get it myself. It's not someone else's turn to give it to me." Xueqi smiled bitterly and said, "Are you really stupid? If you don't take the opportunity to snatch him away now, when will you?" Xueqi's eyes were complicated. She was silent for a long time before she slowly said, "I am not a person who takes advantage of others' difficulties, nor am I a person who demands repayment. I like him because I like his single-mindedness. If he was a fickle person, I would have left him instead." Xueqi stared at his daughter with wide eyes, as if he had met her for the first time. Aren't you asking for trouble? Are you a pervert? Won't you be alone for the rest of your life? Xueqi's eyes were blurred. She said foolishly, as long as he can look at me more when he's free, talk to me more, and cook for me more, I'll be very happy. Xueqi looked at Xueqi in extreme shock and said loudly, Qin, you are really crazy. You. Before he could finish his words, Xueqi suddenly shouted at him, Get out. I don't want you to care about me. Get out. As she said this, she picked up everything she could pick up and threw it at Xueqi. Xueqi had no choice but to scurry out of the room like a rat, leaving Xueqi alone with the pillow in her arms. When Li Yundong returned home, as soon as he entered the door, he saw Wan Hongling sitting in the living room watching TV. Zi Yuan was busy in the kitchen, and there was a clanging sound of chopping vegetables. Watch net. Li Yundong was taken aback. Don't you have your own family? What are you doing here watching TV? Wan Hongling rolled her eyes at him in annoyance. My sister Zi Yuan takes care of you all day long. Can't I just come and sit around casually? Why? Don't you welcome me? It's fine if you don't welcome me. I'm leaving. As she said this, she stood up, patted her butt, and was about to leave. However, as if she wanted to see the world in chaos, she shouted into the kitchen. Sister Zi Yuan, someone dislikes me and thinks I'm an eyesore. I'll go back first. Li Yundong was still a little overwhelmed by Xueqi. Seeing the situation at home, he suddenly felt a headache coming on. He quickly stretched out his hands and said, Okay, I'm afraid of you. You can do whatever you want. Wan Hongling snorted and said proudly, Well, that's what you said. I didn't force you to do this. Li Yundong was so angry that he glared at Wan Hongling and said, You've taken advantage of me, and you still want to show off, don't you? Wan Hongling and Li Yundong didn't get along well, and her natural strength was restrained. When Li Yundong glared at her, she was so scared that she jumped back and shouted, Sister Zi Yuan, look, he's bullying me again. Zi Yuan came out of the kitchen with a dish and looked at them helplessly. Why don't you two go back to kindergarten and quarrel? Li Yundong and Wan Hongling pointed at each other at the same time and shouted at the same time, she, quarreled first. After the two of them finished speaking, they were stunned at the same time. They looked at each other and shouted at the same time. Why are you imitating my words? Zi Yuan put down the dish in her hand and couldn't help laughing. Have you two cultivated the mind-reading ability? Are you so telepathic? Wan Hongling immediately stomped her feet and scolded. Bah, who wants to have a telepathic connection with him? Li Yundong retorted bluntly, I don't care. I only have a telepathic connection with my little girl. Wan Hongling said angrily, What are you proud of? You're just a witch. Li Yundong suddenly became furious. What did you say? Say it again. Wan Hongling was so scared that she quickly ran behind Zi Yuan. She stomped her feet and said angrily, Sister Zi Yuan, look, this person doesn't give you any face at all. He's bullying your shimmy to the point where she's above your head. You don't even support me. Zi Yuan felt a headache coming on. She rubbed her temples and said, Can you two stop talking? Li Yundong still respected Zi Yuan very much. He snorted, turned around, and walked towards his bedroom. Go to the internet. Zi Yuan shouted, Hey, it's almost time for dinner. Li Yundong said in a muffled voice, I have no appetite. After that, he slammed the door. After Li Yundong returned to his room, he put down the fan of 7 treasures, sat by the bed, picked up the pink Hello Little money box, and was lost in thought. Girl. Li Yundong gently stroked the money box with his hand, and his eyes were surprisingly gentle. He murmured softly, Where are you? I miss you so much. In the Fox Zen school, Ao Wushuang looked helplessly at Su Chan, who was looking around, scratching her ears and cheeks. She couldn't calm down. Ao Wushuang sighed and said, What's wrong with you? Why have you been so restless all day? Su Chan shrank her head and glanced at Ao Wushuang timidly. Don't be angry if I tell you. Ao Wushuang had been cultivating with Su Chan these days, but she found that not only had Su Chan not made any progress, but she had also been so tired that she couldn't calm down. In the past, although Su Chan's cultivation talent was not the top, she was at least first class. With hard work and a little luck, she could eventually cultivate to the realm of the six-tailed fox spirit. But now it seemed that since this girl had met Li Yundong, her cultivation had not improved at all. At this time, her first-class cultivation seemed to be at the bottom, which was really annoying. Ao Wushuang felt that she couldn't help but get angry. She suppressed her anger and said, "If you don't tell me, won't I be angry?" Su Chan responded with an "oh" and said with a grievance, "Then I won't say it." The blue veins on Ao Wushuang's forehead twitched. "Tell me," Su Chan asked weakly. "Do you really want me to say it?" Ao Wushuang couldn't help it. She said angrily, "If you don't say it, I'll kick you out." Su Chan was shocked. She got up and ran out the door. Ao Wushuang was stunned. "Hey, where are you going? You haven't told me yet." Su Chan hid at the door and peeked out an eye through the wooden door. She looked at Ao Wushuang timidly and said, "Aren't you going to kick me out?" Ao Wushuang was so angry that she laughed. "I'm kicking you out of the sect, not out of this door. Get in here." Su Chan said, "Oh." She lowered her head and walked to the door. Suddenly, her eyes rolled and a plan came to her mind. She raised her hands and actually rolled on the ground, rolling into the door. Ao Wushuang was stunned. She stammered, What are you doing?" Fortunately, the ground was made of bluestone, and there was no dust on Su Chan's body. She pretended to pat the dust off her body, blinked her eyes, and pretended to be puzzled. "Didn't you ask me to roll in?" Ao Wushuang took a deep breath and said, "Well, you evil disciple, I think you have made up your mind to fight with me." Su Chan giggled and quickly leaned in front of Ao Wushuang. She wrapped her arms around her and said coquettishly, "Master, don't be angry." Ao Wushuang had no idea what to do with her precious disciple. She glared at Su Chan and said, "What the hell are you doing? Tell me. If you don't tell me, I won't be polite to you." Su Chan was not afraid. She cheekily said with a cheeky smile, "I think I heard Yundong calling me just now." Ao Wushuang groaned and raised her hand to rub her temples. "Oh my God, when didn't you say that?" Su Chan pouted and said, "It was true just now." Ao Wushuang said angrily, "Then tell me, when wasn't it true?" Su Chan grabbed her arm and said coquettishly, "I don't care. It must have been true just now. I could feel it." Ao Wushuang was scared. She pointed to the door and said, "Get out, get out. Hurry up, I'm afraid of you. I won't force you to cultivate. When that guy passes the heavens tribulation, I'll send you over. In the future, let him have a headache. Let's see if he despises you." Su Chan was not in the mood to cultivate. She cheered and ran out. When she reached the door, she thought of something and turned around again. She giggled and said, "Master, Yundong loves me very much. He won't despise me." Ao Wushuang laughed and said, "Let's wait and see." Su Chan snorted and said, "Let's wait and see." She quickly walked out of the residence and came to the backyard. The backyard was very elegantly decorated. There were rockery and stone pavilions, small bridges and flowing water, fresh flowers and green grass, making it look quiet and elegant. Su Chan sat down on the stone bench and looked around. Then, she took out a paper crane from her pocket. She pointed at the paper crane and whispered, "Hey, wake up. I'm looking for you." Su Chan wanted the paper crane to fly to Li Yundong again to inform him, but when she poked it with her finger, she saw that it had fallen to one side, like an ordinary paper crane, motionless. It didn't look like it had no spiritual energy at all. Su Chan was shocked. "No way. Is he dead? Or has he run out of spiritual energy?" Su Chan used her hand to turn the paper crane upside down, but the paper crane didn't respond at all. She was suddenly very disappointed. "No way. So useless? It died after a few trips?" Su Chan was very disappointed when she thought that she couldn't send a message to Li Yundong. She stomped her feet bitterly, threw the paper crane forward, and said angrily, "You're so useless. I'm so angry." But just as she threw the paper crane out, the paper crane suddenly flapped its wings in midair and flew to the roof in an instant. F***CK, pretending to be dead? Su Chan suddenly became furious. She stood under the eaves with her hands on her hips and scolded, "You be ****, how dare you fight with me? Are you tired of living? Hurry up and come down, or I'll tear you apart." The paper crane had finally escaped from the devil's clutches, so how could it be willing to go back? It immediately shook its head like a rattle. Su-chan rolled up her sleeves and said angrily, "Well, if you have the guts, don't let me catch you." As she said this, she jumped and flew toward the paper crane. The paper crane was so scared that it trembled all over, turned around, and flew away. Su-chan laughed angrily and said, "Let's see where you can run to." As she said this, her body turned into a blue light and chased after it like lightning. Su-chan was fast, but the paper crane was not slow either. Every time Su-chan was about to catch it, the paper crane twisted its body and abruptly dodged. Su-chan was seething with anger. She chased after the paper crane. After flying through a dozen courtyards, she finally jumped and grabbed the crane under the eaves of a house. Su-chan was so angry that she could see smoke coming out of her nostrils. Su-chan laughed proudly. She was about to speak, but she heard a rustling sound coming from the room. Su-chan suddenly became curious, so she leaned over to take a look through the crack of the door. When she saw it, she was so shocked that her whole body quivered. /OM/ Chapter 230. Go to watch net. The paper crane, which was about to fly into Li Yundong's hand, was stopped by Moashi. Li Yundong, who knew nothing about it, was still striding forward on his own cultivation path. Go to watch net. However, on his way forward, Li Yundong stopped for a while because of Xueqi's matter. The next day, Li Yundong still went to the hospital to visit Xueqi. When he arrived at the hospital, Xueqi was sitting on the hospital bed, surfing the internet with a laptop. There was a faint smile on her lips, and her face was no longer as cold as before. Although her smile was faint, Li Yundong felt as if there was a feeling of spring blooming in the room. To cure a disease, emotion was the most important thing. If a patient was in a bad mood every day, then even if he took elixirs, he wouldn't be able to cure the disease. Even if he was barely cured, he would get sick again sooner or later. Xueqi's mood returned to normal, and Li Yundong's heart also became happy. He walked into the room and said with a smile, "You look in a good mood today." Xueqi's biggest worry was that she might be paralyzed in the future, but now that she knew that Li Yundong could cure her legs, her worries naturally disappeared, and her mood improved. At this time, when she saw Li Yundong visiting her, she was even happier. As soon as she was happy, Xueqi showed a rare little girl's temper. She raised her head and deliberately said with a straight face, "I was in a good mood, but when you came, I was in a bad mood." Although she said this, the smile and happiness hidden in her eyes could not be concealed. Li Yundong also cooperated and put on a sad look. Am I so annoying? Well, I'm leaving." Xueqi said angrily, "Go, go." Li Yundong walked to the door and turned his head. "Hey, I'm really leaving." Xueqi smiled and said, "I won't see you out." Li Yundong chuckled and really turned to go out the door. Sitting on the bed, Xueqi couldn't help but burst into laughter. She smiled sweetly, and her eyes moved. In an instant, the cold ward became bright and beautiful. She snorted in a low voice, "Let's see if you'll come in or not." After she finished speaking, she lowered her head and continued to look at her notebook, but her eyes glanced at the door from time to time. She looked for a while and saw that there was no one at the door. She couldn't help but think to herself, "This guy can't be so petty and really leave, right?" Xueqi waited for a while, but there was still no sign of Li Yundong at the door. She couldn't help but feel a little anxious. She straightened up and shouted at the door, but she was a little embarrassed to call Li Yundong's name directly. She only said, "Hey, hey." She shouted for a while. At the door, she only saw some patients and nurses passing by looking at her ward in confusion, but Li Yundong was nowhere to be seen. Watch net. Net. Super_speed. More. New Xueqi panicked. Just as she was about to shout again, she suddenly heard a familiar voice beside her. "Hey, beauty. Who are you calling?" Xueqi turned her head and saw Li Yundong standing on the other side of her. The boy she had been thinking about day and night was winking at her with a sneaky smile. Xueqi was startled. "Why are you here? Are you a ghost?" Li Yundong chuckled. He pointed to the door connecting the balcony corridor and the ward and said with a smile, "You have a corridor here. I walked to the ward next door, then passed through the corridor from the back door and walked in." Xueqi was tongue-tied. How long have you been standing next to me?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, I think it started when you said that I wanted to see if you could come in or not. Xueqi's face suddenly turned red. She was ashamed and annoyed. She picked up the pillow behind her and hit Li Yundong with all her might. You're so annoying. You're so annoying. Go away, I don't want to see you. Li Yundong laughed and ran 2 steps away. He said, Hey, do you really want me to go? Then I'll really go. Xueqi opened her mouth and wanted to say, Go away, but the words were stuck in her throat. She was afraid that the boy would really leave this time. Who would she cry to? You bastard, don't you know how to give in to me? Why do you always have to control me? Did I owe you in my previous life? Xueqi thought bitterly in her heart. Don't you know that girls sometimes say one thing and mean another? You're so annoying. Seeing that Xueqi was silent, Li Yundong said, Hey, you're not going to say anything? Then I'm leaving. Xueqi immediately threw the pillow at him angrily. Go away, go away. Don't come back again. Li Yundong saw that he had made Xueqi angry, so he laughed and took the pillow. He stopped talking about it and sat down beside her bed. He put the fan of 7 treasures aside and said with a smile, What were you looking at just now? You looked so happy. Xueqi rolled her eyes at Li Yundong. What else could I be looking at? The school forum. Speaking of this, she suddenly became excited and asked Li Yundong, Are you going to perform at this year's welcome party? Welcome party? Li Yundong was stunned for a moment. Isn't it today? Xueqi nodded excitedly like a little girl chasing after a star. Yes, what are you going to perform today? The last performance is still vivid in my mind. Li Yundong smiled. Isn't it arranged by senior sister Feng Na? It's a play from the Legend of Sword and Fairy. I think it's the part where the sword sage takes Zhao Linger away. I'm going to watch it. 7K. Oath M. Xueqi widened her eyes and asked, Who are you going to play? You must be Li Xiaoyao, right? Li Yundong smiled and said, I'm not going to play Li Xiaoyao, the loser who ends up alone in the end. I'm going to play the sword sage. Xueqi let out an ah, and a yearning look appeared in her eyes. She slowly leaned back and said faintly, I really want to see it, but unfortunately, I can't. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. If you don't mind, I'll push you to see it. Xueqi's eyes lit up. Can I? Will it be troublesome for you? Li Yundong thought to himself, You ruined your own family for me and almost became disabled. If I don't even want to do this, wouldn't I be a cold-blooded beast? Li Yundong smiled and said, What are you talking about? Let me give you a massage, and then we'll go. Xueqi smiled happily. That's great. Do you want a massage now? Li Yundong nodded, picked her up, and put her in the wheelchair. Then, he pushed her out and massaged her as he had done yesterday. However, this time, he chatted with Xueqi as he ran his qi. By the way, why are you the only one in this ward? Xueqi closed her eyes and said, I booked all the other beds. I don't like to live with other patients. Li Yundong knew that Xueqi loved silence and was even more afraid of being harassed, so he didn't think too much about it. He asked curiously, Then why don't you stay in the VIP room? Xueqi snorted coldly. Isn't it because of the bureaucrats in the health system? When they saw that my father had lost power, they all came to trample on him and me. They said that the VIP rooms were all full. Humph. Nonsense. The VIP rooms have never been full all year round. Others may not know, but I do. Li Yundong couldn't help but be silent when he heard this. He sighed and said, Xueqi, you will stand up again one day. This sentence had a double meaning, alluding to both her feet and her future life. Xueqi couldn't help but sigh in her heart when she heard this. She tried to move her toes and found that her toes were already flexible and obedient. She knew that she was actually fine. If she wanted to stand up, she could stand up now. But she was unwilling to stand up. In her opinion, this was the happiest period of her life. She would rather sit in a wheelchair like this for the rest of her life, as long as Li Yundong was willing to come to see her every day, talk to her, and make her laugh. Li Yundong didn't know what Xueqi was thinking. After he finished running his qi, he felt that the blood clots and tumors in Xueqi's body had almost dissipated. He asked, How do you feel now? Can you feel your feet? Xueqi turned her face away, not daring to look into Li Yundong's eyes. She shook her head and said, "No, I don't feel anything." Li Yundong was a little disappointed and surprised. He thought to himself, how could there be no effect? This is impossible. After a while, he smiled and said, "Forget it. Let's go to school first. You haven't been back for a long time. Your classmates miss you very much." Xueqi smiled and said, "Miss me? That's not possible. It's possible that they miss you because you haven't been there for a few days. I've seen posts on the forum asking why you haven't been to school these days." Li Yundong smiled. He pushed Xueqi and said hello to Xueqi, who happened to run into him in the corridor. Then, he also said goodbye to the nurse in charge and pushed Xueqi out of the hospital building. After leaving the building, Li Yundong stopped a car and put Xueqi in the back seat. Then, he put the collapsible car in the trunk of the car, and the two of them went to school. After getting out of the car, Li Yundong took Xueqi out of the car and put her in the wheelchair, then pushed her into the school. Along the way, all the students who saw Li Yundong were surprised. When they saw Xueqi, their eyes widened, as if they couldn't imagine why such a beautiful and elegant girl was sitting in a wheelchair. At first, Li Yundong was worried that Xueqi might not be able to stand the stairs. But when he saw that Xueqi's face was calm and composed, he couldn't help but admire her. She's a girl from a respectable family after all. Her psychological quality is really strong. Before he reached the school building, he saw Feng Na. Feng Na was surprised and happy when she saw him. "Li Yundong, I finally found you," she shouted from a distance. Li Yundong saw her and Cheng, who was always by her side. He suddenly laughed and said, "It's you." When Feng Na and Cheng saw Li Yundong, they also saw Xueqi in the wheelchair. Their hearts suddenly skipped a beat. After approaching Xueqi, they carefully greeted her and then asked, "Xueqi, what happened?" Xueqi smiled faintly. "It's nothing. Just a small injury. I'll get better." Li Yundong was afraid that the two girls would ask about her sadness, so he quickly gave them a look. Fortunately, Feng Na and Cheng were smart people, so they quickly reacted and changed the topic. Cheng smiled. "Li Yundong, Nana and I were just wondering if you would stand us up today. We were just talking about you, and here you are. Not bad, not bad. You're trustworthy." Li Yundong chuckled. "As long as you don't cause any more trouble next time, I'll be fine. Especially you, Feng Na." Feng Na pursed her lips into a smile. "When have I ever caused any trouble? Can you give me an example?" Li Yundong laughed. Just as he was about to expose her, he suddenly heard a soft voice coming from behind him. "Li Yundong." Li Yundong heard the voice and turned around. He was shocked. What is she doing here? Well, don't worry, the girl is silly. Fortune favors fools. /om/. Chapter 231. Go to Watch Network. Standing behind him was Ruan Hongling, who had a ponytail and was dressed in a sailor's uniform. Next to her stood Zi Yuan, who was dressed in a plain white dress. Li Yundong hadn't expected Zi Yuan to come to school at all. He asked in surprise, "Why are you here?" Zi Yuan was wearing a white dress, and her long black hair was tied up high, revealing her snow-white and flawless neck. She was like a noble swan, exuding a sense of holiness and pride. Her figure was slender and elegant, and there was not a trace of vulgarity about her. The surrounding students were all stunned. Feng Na and Cheng were also dumbfounded. They stammered, "Is she a fairy? Why is she so beautiful?" Zi Yuan glanced at Li Yundong lightly. She smiled slightly and said, "Can't I come?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "It's not that you can't come, but I didn't expect it." "Did you come to see me?" Ruan Hongling snorted and said, "Don't flatter yourself. Sister Zi Yuan is here to see my performance." Li Yundong asked curiously, "You? What performance do you have?" Ruan Hongling said proudly, "Don't look down on me." Li Yundong couldn't help but taunt, "Who dares to look down on you? Don't cry when you go on stage later." Ruan Hongling was furious. Just as she was about to argue with Li Yundong, she suddenly heard Feng Na look at Ruan Hongling and say, "Ah, are you the freshman beauty who performed calligraphy?" Ruan Hongling snorted, shook her head, and said arrogantly, "Who else could it be?" Li Yundong suddenly asked, "By the way, I haven't asked you yet. Why did you want to study at this university? What department are you studying? Guan Hongling rolled her eyes at Li Yundong and said angrily, It's none of your business. Do I have to tell you that I'm studying history? Li Yundong laughed and said, Do you want to be an archaeologist? History department? The boys in the history department are in trouble. Guan Hongling said angrily, What do you mean by that? Seeing the two quarreling as soon as they met, Zi Yuan said with a headache, Can you two not quarrel here? Li Yundong and Guan Hongling looked around, and sure enough, the students around them were all staring at them with their mouths agape. Feng Na and Cheng Cheng were already very outstanding beauties, and they were very eye-catching. As for Zi Yuan, Guan Hongling, Zhou Qin, and the others, they were all top-notch beauties that were rarely seen in the world. It was extremely difficult to even see one of them on normal days, let alone so many of them suddenly appearing here. Some of the freshmen looked at them with their mouths agape and tongue-tied. They couldn't help but say, Are there so many beauties in this school? So my decision to apply to this third-rate university was actually so wise? The senior student next to him could not help but snort disdainfully and said, Cut the crap. You can only watch from afar and not play with her. Do you dare to go over and strike up a conversation? The freshmen immediately laughed sheepishly. Their eyes were filled with jealousy and envy as they looked at Li Yundong, who was the center of attention. Watch net. 7K. O-Feng Na was a tactful person. She smiled and said, Let's not stand here. Let's go to the backstage of the auditorium. There are no classes today, and all the actors are there. It should be more lively now. Then she said to Li Yundong, By the way, since you're here, you can rehearse at the last minute. You haven't read the script yet. Feng Na couldn't help but say to Li Yundong, How can there be an actor like you in the world? Li Yundong chuckled and said, I'm just a guest star, not the main character. Then, he walked over to Zhou Qin and whispered, Are you going to watch from the backstage or from the audience? Zhou Qin had been silent at first, but now she smiled and said, I'll watch from the audience. It's better there. Li Yundong nodded and said to Feng Na, Then let's go to the auditorium first. It'll be good to grab a few better seats. As he spoke, the group of people ran to the school's auditorium under everyone's gaze. When they arrived at the backstage of the auditorium, they heard a commotion. Feng Na took a look and saw a group of actors who had performances backstage. A boy said loudly, I've already called her, but no one answered. What can I do? No one answered? Call again. Keep calling until it gets through. What's wrong with this woman? How can she be late for such an important event tonight? A girl in an ancient costume said loudly. Go to the internet. 7K. O-M. Feng Na frowned and squeezed through the crowd. What happened? The girl turned her head, and a look of joy suddenly appeared on her face. Nana, you're here? Lu Ling hasn't come yet. I can't get through to her phone. I'm so worried. Feng Na frowned and said, You can't get through to her cell phone. The girl stamped her feet and said, I can, but no one is picking up. That's why I'm so worried. Beside him, a boy dressed in an ancient costume, wearing a blue robe and a blue headscarf on his head, suddenly said, Could something have happened? As soon as he finished speaking, the crowd spat in unison, Bah, you jinx! Li Yundong pulled Feng Na's arm and asked in a low voice, What's wrong? Who is Lu Ling? An actress? If her role is not important, can't we just find someone to replace her? Feng Na smiled bitterly and said, She's playing Zhao Ling. Do you think we can replace her? Li Yundong was shocked. No way. The lead actor is not here yet? But then he comforted her and said, It's okay. There are still 4 or 5 hours before the show starts. It's still early. They will come. Feng Na smiled bitterly and said, That's the only way to think. With that, she turned to the actors backstage and said, Come on, let's get to know each other. The most important minor character of this play is finally here. Let's welcome the Sword Sage. The actors backstage had already recognized the famous figures of the school, and they all applauded and laughed. They glanced at Li Yundong and naturally saw Zi Yuan, who was not far away from him. They were all shocked by her ethereal temperament and beautiful appearance and felt ashamed of their inferiority. Li Yundong smiled at the crowd and said, I'm just here to be a bystander. You guys go on. Feng Na pulled over the girl who had spoken at the beginning and said with a smile. This is Yu Lu, the actress who plays Lin Yueru. Yu Lu was beautiful. Although she was not as good as Feng Na and could not be compared with Zhou Qin and the others, she was still above average. She shook hands with Li Yundong generously and said, Let's shake hands. Li Yundong deliberately put on a straight face and shook hands with her with a serious expression. Yula giggled and said, Sword Sage, please be merciful. Li Yundong waved his hand and sighed with a face full of vicissitudes. I have sealed my sword for many years. Is there anyone in the world who is worthy of my hand? His deliberately showing off made everyone in the backstage laugh. Zhou Qin, Feng Na, and the others covered their mouths and laughed. Ruan Hongling laughed and said, Bah, you're really boasting. You don't even know how to control a sword, but you dare to say that you have sealed your sword? You're so shameless. Zi Yuan, who was standing to one side, couldn't help smiling when she heard Li Yundong's words, but when she heard Ruan Hongling's words, she immediately glared at her. Ruan Hongling knew that she had spilled the beans and immediately stuck out her tongue. Feng Na laughed for a while and introduced the other characters in the play. The one who played Li Xiaoyao was the boy who had worn a cyan headscarf and pretended to be dressed up. His name was Zhong Xueqi, and he was handsome, comparable to Hu Gu. But to Li Yundong's surprise, the one who played Gai Luojiao turned out to be Jiang Xiuxiu, who had made a big mistake before. When Jiang Xiuxiu saw Li Yundong looking at her, she greeted him embarrassedly and then found an excuse to hide in the crowd. Li Yundong felt a little funny in his heart. He smiled at Feng Na and said, I remember that Gai Luojiao's role should be the most important, right? Can Jiang Xiuxiu do it? Feng Na smiled and said, She is an acting major, and her lines are very good. Don't look down on her. Li Yundong smiled and said, How dare I look down on professionals? However, if I want to play the sword sage, you have to give me a prop, right? You can't let me go on stage empty-handed, can you? Feng Na giggled and said, I've already thought about this. After that she called to the backstage, Yan Hua, bring the sword over. As soon as he heard the name, Li Yundong immediately asked in confusion, Have you made up with him? Feng Na smiled and said, Comrade Li Yundong, the president of the student union must be tolerant. I made him the vice president of the student union. Li Yundong cupped his hands and said, I admire you. The president is really a prime minister. You're amazing. After a while, Yan Hua came over with a long sword in his arms. He looked at Li Yundong with vigilance and hostility and snorted. Don't break my sword. As he said this, he took out the sword, but it was not for Li Yundong, but for Feng Na. Li Yundong laughed in his heart. This boy is really petty. Feng Na took the long sword and said with a smile, What kind of family heirloom is this? Is it so important? Ruan Hongling, who was standing to one side, saw the sword and suddenly widened her eyes. She cried out involuntarily, Yan Hua, did you steal your family heirloom? Yan Hua's face turned red. He braced himself and said, What do you mean by stealing? Isn't what belongs to my family also mine? Ruan Hongling turned her head and looked at Zi Yuan in shock. Sister Zi Yuan, isn't this? Zi Yuan shook her head at her, signaling for her to stop talking. Ruan Hongling's heart trembled and she swallowed the rest of her words. Although the others had only seen the antique sword, there was nothing extraordinary about it. Naturally, they didn't know what was so important about what Ruan Hongling hadn't said. But Li Yundong paid attention to it. He walked over to Zi Yuan and Ruan Hongling and asked in a low voice, What did you just say? What's wrong with this sword? Ruan Hongling looked at Zi Yuan. Seeing Zi Yuan nod, she looked at the sword and said in a low voice, This is the Liuha, the sword of my second Sherbua. It and my master's Bahuang sword, which is the Bahuang sword in Ao Wushuang's hand, were originally a pair of swords. Your second Sherbua's sword? Li Yundong was shocked. He suddenly looked at Yan Hua and said, Is he also a cultivator? No way. == tomorrow at the third watch of the night. /om/. Chapter 232. Go to Watch Network. When Ruan Hongling heard Li Yundong's words, she sneered and said, Him. What kind of cultivator is this guy with great ambition but little talent? However, there was indeed a cultivator in his family, but no one in the family knew about it, not even Yan Hua. This sword belongs to Yan Hua's aunt, who is also my second Xueqi. My second Xueqi met my master when she was 14 years old, and then she became a monk with him. 9 years ago, she went to the Fox Zen school to make trouble for Ao Wushuang, and then her whereabouts were unknown. Listening to this past, she couldn't help but show a look of vicissitudes of life in her eyes. I didn't expect that I would see my master's Bahuang sword 2 months ago, and now I see my second Xueqi's Liuhe sword here. Could this be a coincidence? Li Yundong asked in confusion. Why is your second Xueqi's sword in Yan Hua's hand? Ruan Hongling snorted and said, Second Xueqi didn't take her sword with her before she left. She left it in the Yan family and just told us to keep an eye on it. One day she would take it back. Li Yundong was about to speak when he saw Feng Na walking over and asking curiously, What are you talking about? Li Yundong turned around and said with a smile, Nothing, we're talking about this sword. Feng Na handed the sword in her hand to Li Yundong. Here, your prop sword. Li Yundong took the sword and looked at it while asking, Why did you think of asking Yan Hua for this sword as a prop? Feng Na smiled and said, I just asked if anyone had a classical sword to use as a prop, and Yan Hua volunteered. Li Yundong suddenly understood. He stroked the scabbard of the sword with his hand and felt that it was delicate and soft. Ruan Hongling said, The scabbard of this sword is made of shark skin. Its surface is smooth and hard, and it's very wear-resistant. Li Yundong nodded. His fingers swept to the hilt of the sword, and he saw a fine pattern engraved on the edge of the sword. It looked like a very special rune or character. Li Yundong pressed his hand on the hilt of the sword and immediately felt a hidden power in the sword stirring. Li Yundong's heart trembled. He took a deep breath and pulled out the liuhe with a clang. In an instant, the treasured sword was unsheathed. The body of the sword emitted a faint light and a buzzing sound, like the cry of a dragon and the cry of a phoenix. Except for Zi Yuan and Ruan Hongling, the surrounding people were all surprised. Feng Na even cried out involuntarily, Is this the legendary sword recognizing its master? This was too amazing. How could it call out? Li Yundong, how did you do it? Yan Hua stared at Li Yundong with his eyes wide open, feeling annoyed and angry. Why does this guy always want to be in the limelight? Damn it, this is my family's sword. If I had known earlier, I wouldn't have brought it. But he couldn't go back on his word now. He was so angry that smoke was coming out of his 7 orifices, and his nose was almost crooked. Seeing that he was looking at the sword obsessively, she nodded to him and said, Li Yundong, come here. I have something to say to you. Watch net. Li Yundong nodded and put away the long sword. As soon as the liuhe was sheathed, the light and buzzing sound immediately disappeared, making the students backstage click their tongues in wonder. Zi Yuan walked to a corner and whispered to Li Yundong, Li Yundong, this is my second Xueqi sword. I hope you can use it well. Li Yundong laughed and said, What, are you afraid that I'll take it for myself? Don't worry. I have the fan of 7 treasures. I won't swallow your second Xueqi sword. Besides, isn't it Yan Hua's? Zi Yuan shook her head and said, No, since this sword has fallen into your hands, it must have been arranged by fate. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing when he heard this. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly thought of something. No wonder Ruan Hongling and Yan Hua have such a good relationship. It turns out that they can be said to be friends. The two of them came to this school together, and in the end, this sword fell into my hands because of chance. Although I only borrowed it temporarily, it can't be said to be predestined. As Li Yundong thought about it, he suddenly felt as if there was really an invisible hand in this world pulling the invisible thread between people. He couldn't help but be a little dazed. After a while, he came to his senses and looked a little solemn. I see. I will keep it for your second Xueqi. Zi Yuan opened her mouth and was about to speak when they suddenly heard a noise coming from backstage. The two of them turned their heads and saw a girl stumbling into the backstage. Some people cheered. Okay, she's finally here. Feng Na also went up to greet her. She saw that the girl's hair was disheveled, her steps were weak, and her body was full of a strong smell of cigarettes and alcohol. She immediately covered her nose and frowned. Lu Ling, what have you been doing? Lu Ling, who was playing Zhao Linger, raised her head, giggled, and said with a big tongue, I'm sorry. I played too much here. Seeing Lu Ling's appearance, Feng Na frowned more and more. What's wrong with you? Did you know that there's a performance today? Lu Ling frowned and said unhappily, What's wrong? Don't we still have 4 hours? Feng Na had just become the president of the student union, and it was the first time she had organized such an important program since she was elected. Now she had encountered such a thing. She could imagine how unhappy she was. She suppressed her anger and said, So many people are waiting for you. Don't you feel embarrassed? You're performing tonight, and you've made yourself look like this. You don't look like a human, and you don't look like a ghost. Don't you feel embarrassed? Lu Ling stood up and said loudly, What's wrong with me? Is my current appearance not good? After saying that, she pushed her hair back. When the people around saw this, there was an uproar. Watch net. 7K. Li Yundong took a look and immediately thought to himself, Oh my god, how is this Zhao Linger? This was clearly not mainstream. The makeup on Lu Ling's face was like a pot of colorful ink splashed on her face. Her eyes were as black as a panda's, and her lips were painted with purple lipstick. She really looked like a demon. Not to mention Zhao Ling even if she was playing the role of the kitchen god, she would look a bit fierce. The other actors in the show were not happy, and they all criticized. Lu Ling, what are you doing? Look at you. Do you look like a human? Did you take drugs yesterday? Why do you look like this? Hey, how are you going to perform later? Aren't you going to die? Feng Na was furious. Lu Ling, go look at yourself in the mirror. Look at yourself now. Can you perform? Write a self-reflection after the performance. Lu Ling shook her head and snorted. Yes, of course I can. I am fine, aren't I? You want me to write a self-reflection? I won't write it. If you have the ability, then don't ask me to perform. Feng Na was furious. If you don't want to act, then don't. Even a pig would be more suitable to play Zhao Linger. Lu Ling said angrily, Fine, I'll leave now. I'll see who you find to play Zhao Linger. She turned around and left. Feng Na sneered. Zhao Linger is not a stutterer. Lu Ling turned around and was about to retort when she suddenly twisted her foot. With a scream, she fell down the stairs backstage. Suddenly, there was an uproar backstage. The students rushed over. Feng Na hurriedly ordered a student. Send her to the hospital. What the hell? Chung Chung watched as the male student supported Lu Ling, who was crying and holding her ankle. Nana, she said worriedly. There are only 4 hours left. What should we do? Feng Na's face darkened. She hadn't expected that such a thing would happen. She was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan as she paced around the backstage. The other students were also discussing and whispering to each other. Their topics revolved around what had just happened, but most of them were discussing who would play the role of Zhao Linger. Li Yundong couldn't help but smile bitterly at Feng Na. Feng Na, why did you find Lu Ling, a non-mainstream actress, to play Zhao Linger? That's not the way to make a breakthrough, is it? Feng Na smiled bitterly. Oh my god, don't tease me. I'm in a hurry. Lu Ling used to be pretty good. She was a pretty girl. Who knew that she would play so crazily? Li Yundong sighed. I'm not being sarcastic, but where are you going to find an actress to play Zhao Linger? You know, the actress is beautiful, but the most important thing is that she has a fresh and clean temperament. Hearing this, Feng Na glanced at Zhou Qin with a sad face and said, Actually, Zhou Qin's acting is quite good, but now sheath. Zhou Qin had been sitting quietly in her wheelchair and watching the crowd. When she saw Feng Na looking at her, she spread her hands and made a helpless gesture. Feng Na rubbed her temples with a bitter smile and murmured to herself, Who should I find? While she was worrying, she suddenly shouted, I know who to find. Then, she looked in a direction. Her shout immediately attracted everyone backstage to look at her. Then, their gazes followed her gaze in unison. Li Yundong couldn't help but follow their gazes. He saw Zi Yuan standing in the center of everyone's attention with a confused face, at a loss. She will play Zhao Linger? Good, good, good. Li Yundong laughed out loud and said the word good 3 times in a row. Ruan Hongling also looked at Zi Yuan curiously. She was also amused and said with a smile, Sister Zi Yuan, you are quite suitable to play Zhao Linger. But you are a little more mature than Zhao Linger, and your temperament is definitely good enough. Zi Yuan glared at Ruan Hongling. You are so rude. How dare you make fun of your Xueqi? Ruan Hongling giggled and said, Sister Zi Yuan, I was right. Don't you see that so many people are looking at you? This is what everyone expects of you. Feng Na also came over and smiled apologetically. Well, may I know your name? How should I address you? Zi Yuan glanced at her faintly and said, I don't dare. Just call me Zi Yuan. Zi Yuan's gaze made Feng Na feel ashamed of her inferiority. She subconsciously wanted to turn around and leave. She felt that standing in front of Zi Yuan was like an ugly duckling standing in front of a white swan. She was also a beauty, but compared with Zi Yuan, it was like heaven and earth. However, Feng Na had an important task to do, so she could only bite the bullet and say with a smile, Well, Sister Zi Yuan, as you can see, we are in urgent need of an important role. I think you are the most suitable. What do you think? Without hesitation, Zi Yuan said, No way. Feng Na suddenly choked, and the smile on her face froze. She was complaining in her heart, but when she saw Li Yundong snickering, she suddenly became angry. She kicked Li Yundong's calf and said fiercely, Hey, help me. Li Yundong dodged the kick and said to Feng Na with a smile, Go do your thing. I will persuade her. Feng Na lowered her voice and said, Hey, you must get it done, or I will die miserably. Li Yundong waved at her and said, Go ahead. Li Yundong drove Feng Na away, then turned around and said to Zi Yuan while holding back his laughter, Hey, are you really not going to act? It was rare for Zi Yuan to show her feminine side. She rolled her eyes at Li Yundong and said, Do you really want to see me make a fool of myself? Li Yundong smiled and said, Didn't you say that cultivators have to taste all kinds of things in the world? Now the opportunity has come. In a while, you will be able to taste what it feels like to stand under the colorful lights on the stage and receive the attention of thousands of people. This will definitely help your cultivation. Ruan Hongling, who was standing to one side, couldn't help but admire Li Yundong in her heart. This guy is really good at talking. He is targeting my Xueqi's weakness. Sure enough, Zi Yuan hesitated for a moment and asked, Will this be useful? Li Yundong pretended to be elegant. He drew a sword flower with the long sword in his hand and then made a very cool pose. He sighed and said, If you don't experience a big scene, how can you say that you have walked in the world? How can you say that your Taoist heart is as stable as a rock? Zi Yuan's heart skipped a beat. She asked Ruan Hongling, Then who is Zhao Linger? Seeing that Zi Yuan had agreed, Ruan Hongling immediately shouted excitedly, Sister Zi Yuan, you agree? Zi Yuan glared at her and said, You just want to see the world in chaos. Ruan Hongling giggled and explained Zhao Linger and the legend of the sword and fairy to her Xueqi, who had been cultivating all year round. Zi Yuan thought for a moment and sighed. Since I'm here, I'll take it easy. Well, I'll act. What do you need me to do? Hearing this, Ruan Hongling was so excited that she jumped 3 feet high. Great. There's a good show to watch. Zi Yuan looked at her with a mixture of anger and amusement, then asked Li Yundong, By the way, what are you going to play? Li Yundong put the long sword in his hand behind his back, made a finger gesture, and said arrogantly, I will play the role of the sword sage who snatched you away from Li Xiaoyao, the version of the legend of the sword and fairy Wang Hu. After that, he laughed proudly, as if it was a very happy thing to see Zi Yuan suffer a setback. Let's go out to eat and release the first chapter in advance. /om/ Chapter 233. Go to watch net. When Feng Na saw that Zi Yuan had agreed to play Zhao Linger, she was overjoyed. She laughed proudly and said, With this fairy sister joining us, our show will be shocking. Li Yundong laughed and scolded, Is this a beauty pageant? Feng Na made a face at him and said, You don't understand. It's an eye-catching economy now. Then she said to the crowd in a low voice, This fairy sister will play Zhao Linger. Do you have any objections? Everyone laughed and said loudly, No. But one of the boys shouted, I have an objection. Everyone looked at him in unison and saw that it was Zhong Xiuqi, who was playing Li Xiaoyao. He said with a depressed expression, I feel a lot of pressure to be paired with such a beautiful woman. The surrounding students immediately jeered. If you can't do it, hurry up and come down. There are plenty of people who want to play. That's right, it's a blessing in disguise. Xueqi glanced at Zi Yuan and felt that this girl had a noble aura that was simply unattainable. Not to mention standing in front of her and acting. Even looking at her would make his heart beat wildly for a long time. He smiled bitterly and said, "Whoever wants to play can play it." When Feng Na saw that the male lead actually wanted to quit, she quickly coaxed him, "Don't. How difficult is it to get such a good opportunity? Xueqi, you are a film and television performance major. Did you go to class for nothing? How are you going to act in the future? Don't worry. When this beautiful woman changes into her costume, you'll feel like you're on the scene." Xueqi muttered a few words. No one knew what he had said, but at least he stopped talking about quitting. Feng Na spent a lot of time dealing with these people, but she was so tired that she was sweating profusely. Li Yundong took the paper she handed over and glanced at it for a while. He saw that there were very few lines on it. The main thing was to go out and put on a few poses. After that, he would snatch away the beautiful Zhao Linger, and it would be a success. After taking a few glances and memorizing the lines, Li Yundong focused his attention on the Liuhe sword. He tried to transfer his Xueqi into the sword and immediately felt a strong force rebound. This force was soft and lingering, but there was a feeling of hidden needles in its softness. From time to time, it pricked Li Yundong's fingertips. There was hardness in softness, and yang in yin. Obviously, it was the Dharma power and Xueqi left by a master. Watch net. Net. Super_speed. More. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat, and he didn't dare to try again for a while. Otherwise, there would be a flying sword battle that was comparable to computer special effects. Time passed quickly, and before they knew it, it was already night. More and more actors were gathering backstage in the auditorium. After Li Yundong and the others had a boxed lunch backstage, he saw that the auditorium was already full of people, so he pushed Zhou Qin off the stage and told Cheng Cheng to take care of her. Only then did he return backstage. When he returned to the backstage, he saw Feng Na waving at him. Hey, come over here. Get your makeup done. I've been looking for you." Li Yundong was stunned and pointed at himself. "I need to put on makeup?" Feng Na was familiar with him, so she didn't stand on ceremony. She walked behind him, pushed him to the dressing table, and then pressed him to sit down. "Nonsense, who doesn't need makeup on stage? If you don't put on makeup, you'll look like a zombie in the light." After Li Yundong sat down, he looked up and saw a very feminine man walking over with a makeup box in his hand. Before he got close, he could smell a strong smell of makeup. Li Yundong was shocked and thought to himself, "This guy is not a makeup artist. This guy is not a makeup artist." The man walked up to him, stretched out his orchid-shaped fingers, and pinched a piece of powder in his hand. He said with a sweet smile, "Oh, it's my honor to be able to put on makeup for the sword sage." Li Yundong's hair stood on end, and he thought to himself, "Damn, this guy is really a makeup artist." Feng Na burst into laughter. She patted Li Yundong on the shoulder and said, "Just enjoy it." Seeing that she was about to turn around and leave, Li Yundong didn't even have time to call out to her. He could only smile bitterly and say to the trap, "Miss, please be merciful." The trap smiled sweetly and said, "I wouldn't dare to be ruthless towards Sir Sword Sage. Otherwise, if Sir Sword Sage were to stab me with his sword, I wouldn't be able to bear it." If this was really said by a beautiful woman, then it could also be regarded as sexual harassment, and Li Yundong could reluctantly accept it. But if it was said by a man, then Li Yundong felt cold all over. He smiled dryly and didn't dare to speak again. He closed his eyes and stretched out his neck, ready to die a heroic death. Go to the internet. 7K. Oath M. On one side, some girls who had already put on makeup surrounded Li Yundong and watched him put on makeup. The girls who usually didn't dare to look at him now dared to point at him and make comments. About half an hour later, Li Yundong could already hear the program starting backstage. Next to him the trap said, "Well, let's watch." Only then did Li Yundong dare to open his eyes. When he opened his eyes, he saw a white-haired man with an old face in the mirror in front of him. His cheeks were thin to begin with. At this time, after putting on makeup, the hair on both sides fell down again, making his temperament even more like an unsheathed sharp sword, extremely cold and outstanding. The surrounding girls sighed. At this time, Feng Na also came over and looked at Li Yundong carefully, then gave the trap a thumbs up and said, "Not bad, you really have some skills." As she said this, she pushed Li Yundong into the dressing room again. "Hurry up. Go and change into your costume. It's all ready for you." Li Yundong was manipulated by her like a puppet, so he had no choice but to enter the dressing room. When he came out after changing his clothes, the people around him immediately cheered when they saw him. Li Yundong had a head full of white hair and a 2-inch white beard. His long hair trailed over his shoulders, and he wore a long robe that was whiter than snow. On his back was a sword with a red tassel hanging from it. Standing there, he gave off the feeling of a towering mountain. Everyone felt that the person standing in front of them was not a college student, but a sword immortal great grandmaster that only existed in games. Ordinary people would inevitably have an indescribable feeling when dressed in this way, but when Li Yundong wore it, he gave people a strong classical and cold beauty, as if he had really walked out of a game. "Damn!" Feng Na gasped. Even she had not expected that Li Yundong would be able to play the temperament of a sword sage so perfectly. She stammered, "If you participate in SPLY, you will definitely win first place." Li Yundong didn't answer. He just glanced at her from the corner of his eye. His eyes were full of vicissitudes and coldness, as if he had seen all the love and hatred in the world. Feng Na shuddered at Li Yundong's gaze. What kind of gaze is that? She thought. He is obviously a college student younger than me. Why does he have such vicissitudes and cold eyes? This kind of gaze can't be faked. What on earth has he experienced? Li Yundong glanced at Feng Na and snorted. He lifted his robe and sat down on a stool, thinking to himself, this B*TCH is really good at manipulating this old man. If I don't teach you a lesson, you won't know what a sword sage is. His arrogance were really no different from that of a sword sage. Some of the performing arts students nearby were stunned. Jiang Xiuxiu, who was playing the role of Gai Lua Jiao, stared at Li Yundong with wide eyes. Did he study acting before? How can he act so vividly? Feng Na saw that Li Yundong seemed to be immersed in the role ahead of time. She rolled her eyes, then came behind Li Yundong and called out to a classmate. "Hey, hurry up and take a picture of me and Lord Sword Sage." As she said this, she made a V-shaped gesture and grinned. That student was also quick-witted. He took out his camera and snapped a photo. With Feng Na's lead, the students in the backstage immediately burst into an uproar. They crowded in front of the Sword Saint and posed for all kinds of PSS photos. Li Yundong was depressed. Well, they actually used me as a prop to take a photo. While he was feeling depressed, he saw a girl who was squatting next to him and was pretending to be a non-mainstream pout. She turned around and said angrily, "Lord Sword Sage, please smile, okay?" Li Yundong let out a long sigh, stroked his beard, and said, "You all take photos of me as a scenery and don't give me a dime after the photo. How can I smile?" The students around him laughed. "Lord Sword Sage, how much does it cost to take one photo?" "2 yuan a time." "Damn, isn't it too cheap? It should be at least 3 yuan. 3 yuan? Well, I'll take 10 photos. Let me ask weekly, how much is a monthly package?" "A monthly package? Damn, I'm a VIP package for the whole year." The veins on Li Yundong's forehead twitched when he heard this. A bunch of B***stards. Just as they were making a fuss, they suddenly heard an uproar coming from a corner of the backstage. Everyone's eyes immediately turned to look. Zi Yuan was wearing a blue and white gown and a pair of navy blue trousers. She walked out of the changing room gracefully. Her hair was in 2 braids, and there was an ethereal aura in her purity. Her dark eyes were ethereal and deep, making people feel calm and serene at first glance. Li Yundong was also stunned. He thought to himself, this is the enhanced version of Zhao Linger. The ethereal aura on Zi Yuan's body is too strong. It lacks the childishness that Zhao Linger should have at this time, but it has more of an immortal aura. Wherever Zi Yuan went, the sound disappeared. Everyone stared blankly at the woman who had walked from the sky to the mortal world. When Zi Yuan walked to Li Yundong's side, she suddenly lowered her voice and said to Li Yundong, "Do I look strange? Why are they all staring at me?" Li Yundong almost laughed out loud. "It's not strange. It's very good. They're all looking at you because you are so beautiful." Zi Yuan's cheeks turned slightly red. She was about to speak again, but she saw the people next to her pointing at her and Li Yundong. They whispered to each other, "Hey, do you find that when these two people stand together, their temperament is very compatible?" Well, indeed, they are both immortal figures. When they stand together, they are really blessed by immortals. Ordinary people like us can't compare. I envy them so much. But their ages don't match, do they? Idiot, we're talking about temperament. Besides, isn't it very popular for old couples to have young wives now? When Zi Yuan heard this, her Taoist heart was slightly disturbed for a moment, and her face became more and more flushed. At first, Zhong Xiuqi, who was playing Li Xiaoyao, felt very ashamed when he saw Zi Yuan, but when he heard this, he thought to himself, no matter what, she is now my linger. Li Yundong was also very embarrassed when he heard this. He coughed dryly and was about to change the topic when he suddenly saw Wan Hongling rush into the backstage from the stage. She said to Zi Yuan with a smile on her face, "Sister Zi Yuan, I've finished my performance. It's your turn to go on stage." As she spoke, she rolled her eyes and whispered to Li Yundong, "Hey, I'll take care of your fan of 7 treasures for you. Don't hold my sister Zi Yuan back when you go on stage later." Li Yundong laughed and said in a low voice, "I'm afraid that she will hold me back." Wan Hongling rolled her eyes at him and didn't say anything else. Feng Na was shocked. "It's our turn to go on stage?" She stood up, glanced at the program list, and slapped her thigh. D***. It's a mess. Comrades, it's time to go on stage. Get ready. The students backstage who were going on stage in a while answered loudly. They tidied up their clothes one after another. Taking advantage of the lights being turned off on the stage, the actors who had scenes to play at the beginning filed in. Not long after, the heavy curtains slowly opened, and the dazzling light shone on the stage. The most anticipated drama of Tiannan University had begun. /om/ Chapter 234. Go to watch net. The sword sage, played by Li Yundong, appeared at the end of the play. Before he appeared, he had been standing behind the curtain and watching the play on the stage. Go to watch net. 7K, Hong. Almighty had to be said that Feng Na had chosen the play very well. After her modification, this play reflected the tension of a literary play and the fiery and wonderful action play. Moreover, she was temporarily the president of the Taekwondo club, so it was very convenient and easy for her to transfer a few experts from the club to act as extras and action guides. This play was about Li Xiaoyao and Lin Yueru following Zhao Linger's footsteps all the way. They happened to meet Guy Luojiao and Elder Shi, who had taken Zhao Linger away. The two sides fought fiercely, and Elder Shi was outnumbered. In the end, he blew himself up and died with everyone. At this time, the sword sage happened to pass by and saw Zhao Linger. Seeing that she was a demon soul in a human body, and seeing the corpses all over the ground, he thought that she had killed them, so he took her away in anger. In order to make this play more tense, Feng Na modified the part where Li Xiaoyao and Lin Yueru were knocked out by Guy Luojiao. In the end, it was changed to Li Xiaoyao did not faint, and the sword sage forcibly took Zhao Linger away. Li Xiaoyao fought with the sword sage head-on and was defeated without any suspense. In the end, he looked at Zhao Linger across the air and shed tears on the stage. Thinking of this play, Li Yundong felt strange in his heart. He thought to himself, why does this play seem so much like Ao Wushuang taking my girl away? It's not so appropriate, is it? Is Feng Na doing this on purpose, or is it just a coincidence? While he was muttering in his heart, he saw that the fight between Guy Luojiao and Elder Shi had already begun on the stage. This fight was also designed in accordance with the rules. When had the students under the stage seen such a play with swords and swords? All of them cheered and cheered to their heart's content. In the end, Elder Shi was outnumbered. After saying a few words, all the lights on the stage suddenly lit up, so that everyone couldn't help but cover their eyes. Suddenly, all the lights went out, and the stage was dark. At this time, Li Yundong knew that Elder Shi had perished together with everyone. It was time for him to appear. The news that the legend of the sword and fairy was going to be performed at the freshman welcoming party had spread throughout the school a few days ago. Many people were focused on how Li Yundong would play the role of the sword saint, but they were more interested in how the fight would be handled, especially when Elder Shi self-destructed. Everyone wanted to know how to perform on stage. Many people even debated about it on the school forum, but most of them didn't come to a conclusion. But at this time, seeing that Feng Na handled the scene so cleverly, those who knew the ropes immediately cheered, while those who did not know the ropes inevitably felt a little disappointed. One by one, they craned their necks to look at the dark stage, eagerly waiting for the sword saint to appear. Watch net. 7K. Oath M. Sure enough, before long, a beam of light suddenly fell from above and shone on Li Yundong's body. As soon as Li Yundong appeared, his strong aura and temperament, which was extremely close to the sword saint's, immediately attracted the students under the stage to shout excitedly. Even Li Yundong himself hadn't expected that as soon as he appeared on the stage, there would be a tsunami of applause, cheers, shouts, and all kinds of things. It was like a noisy torrent rushing to the stage, so much so that he couldn't even hear his own lines. For a moment, the actors on the stage and Feng Na and the others backstage all felt their hearts skip a beat. They thought to themselves, what should we do? This is going to be an awkward silence. Fortunately, Li Yundong had an idea. He backhandedly took out the sword on his back, and then pulled out half of it with a clang. In an instant, the sword was out of the box. Li Yundong used his qi, and suddenly the Liuha let out a sword cry like a dragon's roar, which resounded through the auditorium. Although everyone's voices were loud, they couldn't cover this sound. Everyone was surprised and couldn't help but stop. They all stared at the stage with wide eyes. The auditorium suddenly fell silent. The students under the stage thought that this had been deliberately arranged and that the sound had been recorded and played through the loudspeaker, but the actors on the stage and the backstage staff knew that this was all caused by Li Yundong. After Li Yundong showed his skills and stunned the students under the stage, he glanced around and said coldly and majestically to Zhao Linger, "Did you kill all these people?" Zi Yuan was naturally intelligent. She was also very into the role and denied it in panic. She shook her head and stepped back. Her appearance made the boys below the stage feel pity for her. They wished they could step forward and stand up for her. Li Yundong snorted coldly. "There are corpses all over the ground, and you are the only one around. If it wasn't you, then who killed them? You devil, how dare you deny it?" As he said this, Li Yundong was about to step forward according to the script. At this time, Li Xiaoyao rushed out to protect Zhao Linger and shouted, "She didn't kill them. I can testify." Li Yundong snorted coldly, flicked his sleeves, and shook Li Xiaoyao off. "Ignorant boy, get out of my way." As he said this, he reached out to grab Zhao Linger. At this time, Li Xiaoyao pulled out his long sword with a clang and shouted at Li Yundong, who was playing the role of the sword sage, "Look at the sword." At this moment, a sudden change occurred. The Liuha behind Li Yundong suddenly made a clanging sound and suddenly came out of the sheath. The long sword emitted a faint brilliance, and the sword body floated in the air, making a clear sword sound. Go to the net. 7K. Oath M. Net. Super_speed. More. New. The magical item was psychic, and it also had similar feelings as human beings. The long sword let out a long cry, and Li Yundong clearly heard it. He could clearly hear the joy of a servant seeing its master, as well as the excitement and emotion of reuniting after a long time. Before Li Yundong could react, Zi Yuan's expression suddenly changed dramatically. Her figure suddenly flashed, and in an instant, she jumped in front of Li Yundong. With her back facing him, she faced an empty space on the stage. She slapped out her palm and shouted, "Appear!" There was a faint green light in her hand, and she slapped it in front of her. With a buzzing sound, the surrounding air was compressed, and in an instant, countless golden hairpins suddenly appeared in the air, piercing through the air and fiercely stabbing towards her. Zi Yuan pushed Li Yundong away and said quickly, "Go and get the Liuha." After that, a purple ribbon suddenly appeared in her hand. She turned her wrist, and the purple ribbon immediately began to spin rapidly. As she spun, she retreated. The purple ribbon was pulled into a spiral cone, and in the middle of the cone were sharp golden hairpins. These golden hairpins were like a school of fish in a fishing net in the entanglement of the purple ribbon. They no longer had any power and could only struggle helplessly. Zi Yuan used this purple ribbon to forcibly slow down the sharp stab of these golden hairpins. She suddenly opened her eyes, and there was a flash of light in them. She slapped at the golden hairpins that had appeared out of nowhere and shouted, "Break!" With a clattering sound, these golden hairpins, which had lost their momentum, were immediately blown back by her. However, when they flew into the air, they formed a 5-inch-long phoenix tail golden hairpin. Zi Yuan stared at the golden hairpin floating in the air with vigilance. She took a deep breath and was shocked in her heart. Is this the threaded hairpin of soul traversal of Mo Ashi of the Fox Zen School? How could it be here? Zi Yuan had pushed Li Yundong away in a hurry, but she had pushed him off the stage. Just as Li Yundong was about to fall off the stage, he suddenly twisted his waist and spun his heels on the edge of the stage. His whole body turned over like a hawk, and his posture was extremely elegant. He stopped falling and stabilized himself on the stage. After he stabilized his body, he stamped his feet and grabbed the Liuha floating in the air like a bolt of lightning. As soon as the Liuha was held by Li Yundong, it struggled frantically. Li Yundong only felt an extremely powerful force coming from his hand. This force shook him so much that he could hardly hold the hilt of the sword with his 5 fingers. The long sword was about to fall out of his hand. It was as if he had grabbed a primitive beast, an ancient monster that he could not control at all. The Liuha was buzzing, and the sound of the sword resounded through the auditorium. Suddenly, the Liuha shook violently and broke free from Li Yundong's 5 fingers. The tip of the sword suddenly swung and stabbed toward Li Yundong's throat. This sudden attack came without warning. Li Yundong was shocked, but it was not the first time he had suddenly encountered a life-and-death situation. Without thinking, he flicked the finger of his right hand toward the blade of the sword and firmly flicked it. With a clang, the Liuha was bounced askew, and the sharp blade brushed past Li Yundong's neck. When Li Yundong's neck was brushed by the blade, he suddenly got goosebumps all over his body. At this moment, he felt that death had brushed past him. What's going on? Who wants to kill me? Li Yundong was shocked and angry. He reacted quickly. When the Liuha passed by him, he grabbed the hilt of the sword with his hand. As soon as his fingers touched the hilt, he felt the long sword suddenly turn and the blade cut toward his neck. Li Yundong was shocked. He flipped in the air and shrank his head. The long sword was close to his head. Then, he took advantage of the momentum of flipping in the air and gave a loud shout. He stabbed the Liuha into the floor of the stage. With a thud, the Liuha was stabbed into the floor like a sword in the stone. Only half of the sword was exposed. It was buzzing and trembling, as if it was trying to struggle out of the ground. Li Yundong had the experience of taming magic weapons, so he immediately poured the huge Xueqi in his body into the Liuha. As he poured it in, the Liuha suddenly struggled more and more. The faint light on the sword turned into an obvious white light, and the floor of the stage was buzzing and trembling. The huge Yuanyang Xueqi in Li Yundong's body fought fiercely with the Liuha's own magic power and Xueqi. This Xueqi was a combination of yin and yang, and it was extremely powerful. Li Yundong could resist the yang qi in it, but he couldn't stand the cold yin qi that was like gossamer and pricked him from time to time. While the two forces were in a stalemate, a drop of blood suddenly dripped from Li Yundong's neck where the blade had brushed past. The drop of blood fell on the hilt of the sword. Suddenly, Li Yundong heard a shrill sword cry from the Liuha, and the resistance inside the sword instantly weakened a little. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly remembered what Su Chan had said to him after he had broken Ruan Hongling's magic weapon with his bare hands. The blood of a virgin's Yuan Yang is the most yang in the world, and it specializes in breaking all the yin qi in the world. Li Yundong immediately took a deep breath, loosened one hand, and wiped the wound on his neck with his finger. Then, he wiped the blade of the Liuha with his bloody finger from top to bottom. Suddenly, the Liuha let out a tragic cry, and the sword trembled violently. Then, Li Yundong felt that the soft and tenacious resistance inside had suddenly disappeared, and his Yuanyang power had broken into the blade of the Liuha like a hot knife through butter. In the blink of an eye, the Xueqi of the original owner of the sword had been completely broken by Li Yundong. The Liuha in Li Yundong's hand suddenly quieted down, as gentle and docile as a virgin. With a thought, he pulled out the long sword with a swish. With a clang, the blood on the Liuha quickly merged into it, leaving a looming character on the sword, and then disappeared in a flash. After being subdued by Li Yundong, the Liuha let out a clear and loud sword cry again. The sword suddenly emitted a dazzling light, and the sword qi soared into the sky. It was so amazing that it shocked people's hearts. From the sudden attack of the threaded hairpin of soul traversal and the Liuha to Zi Yuan dispersing the attack of the threaded hairpin of soul traversal, And then Li Yundong subdued the Liuha. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. Li Yundong and Zi Yuan moved as fast as lightning. The actors on the stage were stunned, and the students below the stage were in an uproar. All the audience stood up in an uproar. They shouted in shock, F***CK. Isn't this too exaggerated? What kind of stunt is this? There are always some children who ask me at night. Tang Tang, why did you only update once today? Why didn't you update today? Tang Tang replied speechlessly. Boss, I update at least 2 times a day. This is unchangeable. From time to time, I will update 3 times. I know that some children like to save the table of contents of books and then read the updated chapters there. I do the same. But sometimes the display of the chapter table of contents is delayed. Sometimes delayed by a few hours. I can't help it. I suggest that you spend some effort to register and then click on the collection button. In the future, you can see the latest updates on your bookshelf every day. My update time is around 14 o'clock at noon and 21 o'clock at night. If the 3 chapters are around 14 o'clock, 18 o'clock, and 21 o'clock respectively. Please, everyone, you can see the updates as soon as possible. You can also register an account and throw flowers to Tang Tang. When the time comes, maybe Tang Tang will release 1 or 2 more chapters. Why not? /om/. Chapter 235. Go to Watch Network. The sudden abnormality on the stage caused an uproar in the auditorium. Most of the people below the stage had not reacted yet. They thought that it was a deliberately arranged effect, so they were so shocked that they shouted and shouted. Watch Net. A small number of students felt that something was wrong. They said loudly, how did Zhao Linger become a friend of the Sword Sage? Isn't this too ridiculous? Zhao Linger betrayed him? Damn, who wrote this script? So non-mainstream? Isn't this too postmodernist? How did the Sword Sage get together with Zhao Linger? Damn, isn't this Li Xiaoyao too tragic? This Sword Sage is too handsome. If I were Zhao Linger, I would also betray him. Damn, you fickle man. So you're a chrysanthemum fan? Some of the students below the stage made a ruckus, and the actors on the stage were all dumbfounded. They looked at each other, dumbfounded, especially the actors who were pretending to be dead on the ground. They couldn't help but want to get up and see what was going on. Those who had their heads facing away from the stage were fine. By opening one eye and closing the other, they could secretly see what had happened on the stage. Even the actors who had died on their backs could barely see a little if they squinted their eyes. However, some of the actors whose heads were facing the stage or lying on their stomachs were suffocating. One by one, they heard the clamor below the stage, and also heard the frightening movement just now, but they didn't know what had happened. They just had to hit their heads and couldn't move. They were so anxious that they were scratching their ears and cheeks. It was as if there were 25 little mice scratching their hearts. On the stage, a corpse near Li Xiaoyao couldn't help but pull Li Xiaoyao's trousers and whisper, "Hey, what's going on?" Zhong Xueqi, who was playing Li Xiaoyao, was already dumbfounded. His eyes almost fell out of their sockets. He stammered, how would I know?" A few of the corpses who were closer to Li Xiaoyao also pretended to be dead on the stage and whispered to each other, "Could this be a last-minute addition?" "I don't think so." "Then what's going on?" "How would I know?" "What should we do?" "How are we going to continue acting?" "You're asking me? Who am I supposed to ask?" "We're all dead now, big sister. Just lie down obediently. Watch the show, yes, watch the show." Feng Na, who was backstage, was also dumbfounded. She stared blankly at the stage. She had no idea why such a thing had suddenly happened. The trap makeup artist, who had been standing next to her, couldn't help but ask Feng Na in shock, "Nana, when did you add scenes in private? Why didn't you inform us?" Feng Na's face twitched. She forced a smile, but it looked worse than crying. "I didn't add any scenes." The trap gasped. He looked at the stage in disbelief and asked, "What happened just now?" Cheng Cheng, who was under the stage, was also stunned and said, "What the hell is going on? That's not how the show is arranged." Only Zhou Qin understood what had just happened. It was not the first time she had seen Li Yundong, Zi Yuan, and the others use magic. Watch Net. 7K. Oath M. She looked at Li Yundong and Zi Yuan with a complicated expression. Her eyes flickered, revealing a thoughtful look. Xueqi stood on the stage at a loss. He could clearly hear the shouts and laughter of some students below the stage. He also knew that he should think of a way at this time. Otherwise, if there was an awkward silence, it would become a joke. Xueqi pointed at Li Yundong and shouted, "Where on earth are you taking her?" This sentence was purely an extra sentence he added on the spot. The implication was to remind Li Yundong and Zi Yuan, "Hey, you two bosses, we are still acting here. Don't mess around." But Li Yundong was at a critical moment of life and death, so how could he care about this? His eyes were fixed on the roof of the auditorium. The threaded hairpin of soul traversal was hidden in a place where the light could not reach, like a poisonous snake that would jump out at any time. Li Yundong lowered his voice and said to Zi Yuan, "What the hell is going on?" Zi Yuan also lowered her voice and whispered, "I don't know, but just now." She was about to say something else when suddenly the threaded hairpin of soul traversal stabbed toward Li Yundong like lightning. Its speed was so fast that it seemed to tear the air apart. Zi Yuan immediately pushed out with one hand, trying to push Li Yundong away, but how could Li Yundong be willing to let a delicate woman protect him? He reached out and pulled Zi Yuan behind him. Then with a loud shout, he shook the lioha in his hand and drew a sword flower with his wrist. In an instant, the sword flower turned from 1 to 2, and then from 2 to 4, blocking the front of him tightly. The people below the stage saw a white light surging in front of Li Yundong, like a surging steel wall. In the white light, there was a flash of golden light, like a pervasive gossamer. As soon as the golden light and the white light came into contact, there was a dense clanging sound. Go to the internet. 7K. Oath M. At first, the crowd could still hear the gap, but soon they heard that the clanging sound was so dense that it seemed to be connected into a line, making it hard for them to breathe. The moment Li Yundong held Zi Yuan's hand, her whole body suddenly tightened. She had lived for so long, and this was the first time a man had touched her skin. Her cheeks flashed with shame. Just as she was about to lose her temper, she saw that Li Yundong had already fought with a threaded hairpin of soul traversal. It was the first time in her life that Zi Yuan had come into contact with a man. For a moment, her Taoist heart was lost, and her mood was agitated. She looked at Li Yundong's figure behind him and suddenly felt a little lost. In a trance, she seemed to see her master. In the past, he had used such a broad back to shelter her from the wind and rain. At this moment, Zi Yuan felt that the world around her seemed to have quietened down. There was only this familiar figure in her eyes, but this feeling only lasted for a moment. Soon, her master's figure drifted away and was replaced by Li Yundong's back. At this time, everyone in the auditorium was dumbfounded. They couldn't understand what was going on at all. They were just dazzled, as if they were watching a movie. After Li Yundong blocked a series of attacks from the threaded hairpin of soul traversal, the threaded hairpin of soul traversal suddenly retreated and instantly split into countless golden hairpins. These golden hairpins formed a fierce face, which glared at Li Yundong fiercely, and then quickly merged into one. In the blink of an eye, it fled toward an open window in the auditorium. Li Yundong shouted, "Where are you going?" He jumped and chased after it. Zi Yuan didn't stop her. She hesitated for a moment, then immediately chased after her. The two of them flashed and jumped out of the window with a few leaps. For a moment, the auditorium was silent. Everyone opened their mouths wide, as if they couldn't believe their eyes. Because what had happened before was so incredible and shocking, most of them still hadn't reacted. They still thought that it was an act and that some of the incredible things in it were stunts. They were in a daze for a while. Suddenly, a boy couldn't help shouting, "Damn it, Zhao Linger eloped with a sword sage." This shout was particularly abrupt in the silent auditorium, and it immediately caused the students in the auditorium to laugh wildly. Isn't this too funny? Zhao Linger actually eloped with the sword sage. Li Xiaoyao is too tragic, isn't he? His own woman actually eloped with an old man. Who wrote this play? It's so funny. It can win the Nobel Prize for parody. Talented, really talented. This play deeply satirizes the current social situation. As a rich, powerful big shot, the sword sage naturally has beautiful women willing to throw themselves into his arms. Even Zhao Linger is no exception. F***ck. Brother, Your analysis is so strong. I'll F***CK your lungs. On the stage, Xueqi was alone, tears streaming down his face. I just want to act. Is it easy for me to play Li Xiaoyao? Who did I offend? He looked around and saw Feng Na and the others backstage, dumbfounded. The actors who had been killed on the stage were all lying on the ground and laughing. The heavenly bastard who had been in charge of the curtain didn't even know that it was over. He was standing alone on the stage, not knowing whether to advance or retreat. He was at a loss. Fortunately, Xueqi had an idea. He suddenly let out a miserable scream and then shouted, "Linger, wait for me." As he said this, he ran backstage. The audience under the stage laughed so hard that some students who were bored shouted, "Hey, you're running in the wrong direction. The old and the young are a couple. Why do you want to join in the fun? Can a man also be a mistress? Damn it, the most tragic Li Xiaoyao in history is born." The people in the auditorium were laughing, but Li Yundong, who had just come out, didn't know anything. He had just learned to fly, so his speed was naturally not very fast. After chasing for a short distance, he lost sight of the threaded hairpin of soul traversal. Ziyuan quickly came to his side and said in a deep voice, "Don't chase after him." As soon as she finished speaking, Ruan Hongling also came out and said with a shocked face, "Sister Ziyuan, what happened just now? What kind of magical item is that golden hairpin?" Ziyuan said with a stern expression, "That's the threaded hairpin of soul traversal of Moashi, the eldest disciple of the Fox Zen school." Ruan Hongling couldn't help but say angrily, "Is the Fox Zen school tired of living? How dare they assassinate you?" Ziyuan shook her head and looked at Li Yundong. "No, she didn't want to kill me, but Li Yundong." Li Yundong's face was as dark as water. "I also felt that the threaded hairpin of soul traversal was targeting me just now. But why did she want to kill me? After all, I have some relationship with the Fox Zen school. Why did she want to kill me?" Ziyuan thought for a while and said, "I will investigate this matter, but compared to Moashi and the threaded hairpin of soul traversal, I am more concerned about another thing." "What is it?" Li Yundong and Ruan Hongling asked in unison. Ziyuan's expression was surprisingly calm. She said, "Why did the Lioha suddenly recognize its master when the threaded hairpin of soul traversal appeared?" Li Yundong suddenly remembered that he had seen the Lioha jump out of its scabbard by itself and make a sword sound. He was shocked and said, "You mean your second Sherbo was nearby at that time?" Ruan Hongling was also shocked. "Second Sherbo? She's here? /om/" You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.